The village had written him off 5 years ago, just like they break and throw away an old tool. No food, no firewood, not a single soul in sight. They thought winter would finish him off. They didn't know that this frail body now held 110 years of knowledge of the forest, and a little something else, a warm pocket under his ribs where he could hide anything. And it all started with the cold. Not the frost outside, the cold inside. His bones ache as if they'd been ground up and put back together in the wrong order. He opens his eyes. Black ceiling boards. The smell of smoke, old blood, and something sour. He coughs and doesn't recognize his own cough. Hoarse, senile. He raises his hand and sees someone else's fingers, knotty, with nails like a turtle shell. He struggles to sit up and nearly loses consciousness. The walls slide away, and then someone else's memory crashes down on him. 80 winters in the mountain forests. The names of the trails he'd walked for half a century. The way to skin a marten without tearing the pelt. A name. Choi Dong-yu, 73 years old. A hunter. A widower. An old man cast out by the village. And then his own memory comes flooding back. Mark Holloway, 47 years old. Montana. A blizzard. The hiker he'd been carrying on his back for the last 2 kilometers. He'd carried her to the guardhouse, sat down by the door to catch his breath, closed his eyes for a second, and he died. And now he's sitting in a stranger's body in a strange world, staring at a bowl of frozen porridge. He gets up on the second try. He holds onto the wall with both hands. His knee shoots with pain with every step. His memory reminds him, a wild boar's tusk, 20 years ago. The joint was left crooked. He limps over to the table and stirs the porridge. Barley. Cheap. Unsalted. The food of a man they've stopped feeding. The hearth is cold. The firewood is gone. On the wall, a knife, a broken bow, an empty quiver. Nothing else. The wind howls outside the walls. Winter, the coldest in 40 years. Dong-yu's memory knows this for certain. The snow fell in October and hasn't melted. Wolves have come down from the mountain passes, and in the village, people whisper about the gray tiger, a man-eater, a beast even the cooperative hunters fear. And he stands here, in a body that would break from a single fall. But there's something else. He closes his eyes and listens to himself. 30 years of Mark Holloway, a gamekeeper, a survival instructor, plus 80 years of Dong-yu's hunting memory. 110 years of forest wisdom in a body that will die in 2 winters if he doesn't act now. And a warm spot beneath his ribs, like a pocket turned inside out. Dong-yu's memory is silent about him, but Mark feels it. A space, small, quiet, hidden inside like a secret cellar. He touches his chest and something shifts. Not in his body, deeper. He'll figure it out later. First, a fire. First, survive. He pulls out his knife. The blade is dull, but the steel is good. He finds a flint. Under the deck chair, a leather bundle tied with black ribbon. He reaches for it, and Dong-yu's memory shudders like a burn. Don't touch it. He pulls his hand back. Later. He steps outside, and the light hits his eyes. Snow up to his knees. The sky is gray and low like a coffin lid. Below lies the village. 3 dozen houses. Smoke rising from the chimneys. The path leading to him is blocked by snow. No one has come here in a long time. He's been written off like a broken tool, put on a shelf and forgotten. He walks to the nearest fir tree and breaks off the dry lower branches. His hands are shaking. His fingers won't obey him. He gathers an armful, drops half of it, picks it up and carries it over. He strikes a spark on the 4th try. The birch bark catches fire. The flames spread along the branches and the warmth hits his face. He rubs his hands and thinks. There's no food. Just enough firewood for the evening. There's no water, but there's snow. The knife is dull, the bow is broken, and not a single person in the village will give him even a handful of grain. Both memories work together, a strange feeling, like reading 2 books at once and understanding both. Mark knows how to cure meat without salt, how to make a trap out of nothing. Dong-yu knows every trail, every watering hole, every clearing where hazel grouse feed in winter. Together, it's more than the sum of its parts. It's a chance. He pulls 3 horsehairs from the fence and weaves a noose. His fingers won't obey him. A knot, a second, a third. The noose turns out rough but functional. Dong-yu's memory suggests a spot, the alder undergrowth higher up the slope. That's where the hazel grouse feed at dawn. Mark knows how to find the exact spot by the snapped buds. 3 buds on a branch have been snapped off at the same height. That means the bird has landed here more than once. He heads out again. The sun is setting. His knee is burning. His breath catches every 30 steps. He finds the alder. The buds are snapped off exactly as he expected. Under the snow cover lies last year's rowan berries. Bait. He sets the snare, scatters the berries, and checks the tension. Now he must wait. He goes downstairs, melts snow in a bowl, and drinks the warm water. His stomach cramps with hunger. There's nothing to eat. And then there's a scratching sound at the door. Quiet, careful, not an animal. An animal would scratch confidently. This sound is human. Someone is standing behind the door, hesitating to knock. He opens it. 3 women stand on the threshold, snow on their shoulders. Their faces are gray from the cold and hunger. The oldest stands upright, tall, a stern gaze, devoid of supplication, only calculation. The middle one has hunched her shoulders and is looking at the ground. On her wrist is an old bracelet. The youngest is clutching a boy of about 5 to her chest. He's pale. His eyes are closed. He's breathing heavily. A fever, my memory tells me. 3 widows. Their husbands died in the logging camps last fall. The village wrote them off just as it did him. They weren't fed. They weren't allowed to the well. The eldest speaks. There's nowhere else to go. The village head has locked the granary to them. The well was blocked off 3 days ago. The boy has a fever and hasn't eaten for 2 days. She isn't asking for mercy. She's offering to work. 3 pairs of hands in exchange for a roof over their heads. Her voice is steady. She'd been rehearsing this speech on her way here, and now he's standing in the doorway. A 73-year-old man with no food and almost no firewood. And 3 women with a child have come to him because he's the last person who can still open the door. He steps aside and says one word. Come in. They enter. The youngest sits down by the hearth and turns the child toward the warmth. The boy moans. His forehead is burning hot. Dong-Yu his neck. His pulse is rapid. His skin is dry. He's had a fever for at least 2 days. He needs the herb, ledum. Mark knows its properties. It brings down the fever and reduces inflammation. Dong-Yu knows where it grows, but in winter, you can't find it by smell. There's a sign. Bog rosemary grows next to blueberry bushes, and the blueberry bushes stick out from under the snow with their reddish stems. He takes a knife and steps out into the darkness. He searches for the reddish stems by moonlight. He finds them. He digs through the snow with his hands. His fingers go numb. Under the snow are frozen stems with leaves. He cuts a bunch, returns home, and brews a tea. He gives it to the boy to drink. The child drinks eagerly, coughs, and drinks some more. Half an hour later, he falls asleep. His breathing is more even. The older woman asks how he knows about this herb. A hunter who doesn't know herbs doesn't live long. She remains silent and asks his name. He says she knows it. She shakes her head. She knew old Che Dong-Yu, but he wouldn't have gotten up in the dark to look for herbs for someone else's child. He doesn't answer. He sits by the fire and counts. 5 of them, including him. No food, firewood for the night, 1 snare on the slope, and maybe by morning there'll be a hazel grouse in it. Maybe. A body falling apart, knowledge beyond price, and a warm pocket beneath his ribs. He touches his chest, and a space opens up. Small, like a barn 3 by 5 paces. Empty, cold. But time passes differently inside, more slowly. He knows this with his body, not his mind. Put meat in there, and it won't spoil. Put grass in there, and it won't dry out. He closes the pocket. He looks at the sleeping boy, at the 3 women by the fire. The oldest one is waiting. She's ready to give up, ready for anything. He pours himself some hot water and says he'll check the snare in the morning. There'll be meat. If not, he'll go set more traps. That tomorrow, they'll need to gather enough firewood to last 3 days. That the boy needs to drink the herbal tea every 4 hours. He speaks calmly, like a man who has a plan. He has no plan. He has 110 years of knowledge of the forest and a body that could give out at any moment. But they don't need to know that. They need someone who tells them what to do. He finishes his water and lies down on the floor by the hearth. There's only 1 cot, and the feverish child is already on it. His bones ache. His knee shoots with pain. Get up before dawn tomorrow. Check the snare. Sharpen the knife. Find water. Find food. Survive today. Then tomorrow. Then the day after tomorrow. It seems that's what his life looks like now. He woke up before dawn. His body ached as if he'd been beaten all night. His back wouldn't straighten. His knee had swollen even more. He lay on the floor by the extinguished hearth, and for a few seconds couldn't remember where he was. Then he remembered. A strange body, a strange world, a mountain village. Winter. He turned his head. 3 women were sleeping against the wall. The youngest was hugging her son. The boy's breathing had evened out. The fever hadn't gone away, but it had subsided. The bog rosemary was working. Dong-Yu sat up. Each vertebra cracked separately. He stood up. His legs held him up, but barely. He tossed the last few branches into the hearth and went outside. It was still dark outside. The frost was so biting that the air cut into his throat. He walked up the slope toward the alder thicket. The snow crunched under his feet. He counted his steps. He stopped at the 100th one. He caught his breath. He walked on. He reached the snare in 15 minutes. A hazel grouse was struggling in the snare, a plump, winter-fed bird with a crop full of rowan berries. Dong-Yu took it down. His hands were shaking from the cold. He snapped the bird's neck, quickly, without any unnecessary movements. He surveyed the spot, set the snare again, scattered the last few berries. He continued up the slope, found another spot, 3 torn buds on a nearby alder. Second attempt. He pulled 3 threads from the hem of his own jacket. He tied a noose, rough, but it would hold. He set it. He climbed back down. It was warmer in the hut. The fire was burning. The older widow hadn't gone to sleep. She was sitting by the hearth, staring at the door. She was waiting. He placed the hazel grouse on the table. She looked at the bird, then at him. She said nothing. He took the knife. He began to gut it. His hands remembered. Both sets of memories worked together. Mark knew the bird's anatomy. Dong-Yu knew how to hold the knife so as not to tear the skin. He pulled the skin off with a stocking. He separated the breast. He separated the legs. He carefully removed the giblets. He set aside the liver. He set aside the heart. He cut open the gizzard and cleaned it. From a single hazel grouse, he made 6 portions. The breast, 2 thighs, the liver and heart, the stomach. Broth made from the bones and wings. The eldest widow watched. She had seen a bird butchered hundreds of times, but not like this, not with such precision, not with such attention to every single piece. He placed the bones in a bowl of water to simmer. The broth would be thin, but hot and nourishing. He sliced the breast thinly and placed it on the coals. The fat sizzled. The smell of meat wafted through the hut. The middle widow woke up. She sat up. She drew in a deep breath. An expression appeared on her face that Dong-Yu would remember for a long time. Not joy, not gratitude. Disbelief. She didn't believe the smell was real. The boy stirred. The youngest widow lifted him up and touched his forehead. She looked at Dong-Yu. She said his fever had gone down. Dong-Yu nodded. He asked her to give him some broth once it had cooled, and another serving of the bog rosemary decoction. They ate in silence. Dong-Yu divided up the meat. He took the stomach and the wings for himself. He gave the breast and thighs to the women and the boy. The eldest noticed. She said nothing, but noted it. After the meal, he sat down by the wall and began sharpening his knife. He'd found the stone yesterday by the stream. It was flat, with a fine grain, just right. He sharpened it slowly, at a 20-degree angle, 15 strokes on each side. He tested it on a hair. The blade cut it cleanly. Good. Now the knife was ready for use. He looked at the eldest woman. He called her by name, Songfa. She flinched. She wasn't used to being addressed by name. He said he needed help. They needed to gather firewood, a lot of it, enough for at least 3 days. He couldn't manage it alone. His body wouldn't let him. She nodded. She stood up. He explained which branches to pick. Dry ones, the lower ones. Fir for kindling, birch for heat, oak for embers. She listened carefully. He noticed how she was listening, not just hearing, memorizing, sorting it all in her head. The scribe's daughter, literate, smart. Used to her intelligence was of no use to anyone. He sent her and the middle daughter out to gather firewood. The youngest stayed behind with the baby. Dong-Yu went out alone. He needed to find water. The stream that old Dong-Yu remembered was 300 paces to the west. In winter, it never froze completely. A thin trickle ran beneath the ice. He made it there. He found the stream. He broke the ice with a rock. He filled the clay jug he'd found in the hut with water. It was heavy. Carrying it back up the slope was torture. His knee was killing him. He stopped every 50 steps. But he made it back. Then he went again. He brought back a second jug. The third time, he couldn't do it. He sat down in the snow and just breathed. His body was giving out. 73 years old. Joints that had spent his entire life in these mountains. A heart that was pounding too fast from a simple climb. He sat in the snow and thought, this won't work. He needed levers, ropes, a system. Carrying water up the slope by hand every day was impossible. He remembered. Mark knew how to make the simplest water conduit out of birch bark. A trough, a slope, gravity. Birch bark doesn't let water through if you peel it off correctly. But for that, he needed a birch tree, and a knife, and time, and hands that didn't shake. All right, tomorrow. Today, he had to survive. He stood up. He went back to the hut. Sonwa and Yunji had already brought in the first armful of firewood. He took a look. Sonwa had gathered it correctly. Dry branches, different sizes, fir separate from birch. She'd remembered. Yunji had gathered whatever she could find. Wet mixed with dry, thin mixed with thick, but there was a lot of it. The small, wiry woman hauled the firewood like a mule, silently, her head tucked into her shoulders. She didn't look him in the eye. He didn't correct her. He said thank you. Yunji froze. She glanced at him quickly and looked away again. He understood. No one had ever thanked her. Not in a long time. Maybe never. They made 3 more trips. By noon, a decent stack of firewood lay against the wall of the hut. It would last 3 days if they stoked the fire sparingly. Dongyu sat down by the hearth. He pulled a broken bow from under the cot. He examined it. The shoulder was cracked. The string had snapped. It could be repaired, but he needed glue. Glue could be made from fish bones or hooves. He had neither. He set the bow aside. For now, just snares. Snares and a knife. That would be enough for small game. Hazel grouse. Maybe a hare. But for anything serious, he'd need a bow, or a trap, or a pit, he thought. The second day. 1 hazel grouse for the 5 of them. That's not enough. The child needs fat. The women need porridge. He himself needs strength he doesn't have. He took out his knife. He found a thin hazel branch in the yard. He began whittling. Stakes for a trap, the simplest kind of pressure trap. 2 sticks, a stone, bait. The animal pulls on the bait, and the stone falls. Mark used to set these up in Montana during field training. The kids could manage it in 20 minutes. It took him an hour to carve the pegs. His hands were shaking, and the knife kept slipping. Damn hands. Damn body. But he finished. 4 sets. 4 traps. He'll set them out tomorrow. In the evening, he went out to check the snares. The second snare was empty. An animal had tugged at the first one but hadn't been caught. The snare was torn. He set a new one. He returned empty-handed. There was no dinner. He boiled some bark and the leftover broth from the morning's hazel grouse, a watery broth, almost tasteless. He divided it among the 5 of them. The boy drank it and fell asleep. The fever had almost subsided. The bog rosemary was doing its job. Dongyu sat by the wall and stared into the fire. Min-su, the youngest. She came up to him after everyone had fallen asleep, quietly. She didn't say a word. She just came over and started untying her sash. He understood. Not right away, but he understood. She was paying. The only currency they'd left her. He caught her hands, gently, without harshness. He told her she didn't need to do this. He told her that food was just food, a roof was just a roof, that there would be no payment, not now, not later. She stood there and looked at him. There was something in her eyes he couldn't put into words. Not relief, not gratitude, something more. Something like the first breath of air after being held underwater for a long time. She went back to her son and lay down beside him. Dongyu was sitting against the wall. He thought about how this woman had lived 22 years and not a single man in her life had ever told her that kindness doesn't have to be repaid. He thought about how survival isn't just about food and fire. It's also about people who stop being afraid. The morning of the 3rd day. He got up before dawn. His knee wouldn't bend. He stretched it out while standing. 5 minutes. It hurt. He went outside. He checked the snares. A hazel grouse was caught in the first one. In the second one, too. 2 hazel grouses. They'd have something to eat today. He took down his catch and went to set the traps. 4 snap traps. He placed them along the animal trails. Bait, berries, and bark. He returned. He gutted the birds. Songva stood nearby and watched. He demonstrated. He explained every cut. Here's the joint. The knife goes between the cartilage, not through the bone, but through the cartilage. She nodded, memorizing each step. He handed her the second hazel grouse and the knife. He told her she would gut it herself now. She took them. Her hands trembled slightly. The first cut was crooked, the second was straighter, the third was almost right. She butchered the bird in 20 minutes, roughly, but edible. Dong Yu nodded. He said it would be better tomorrow. She looked at him. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. Not gratitude, excitement. She enjoyed learning. She enjoyed doing something right and hearing that it was right. He thought about it. The scribe's daughter, whom no one had taught anything but silence for 10 years. Day 4. The traps had yielded a catch. 1 vole. Small, but meat is meat. He carefully removed the pelt. He showed it to Yunji. She took the pelt and examined it. Her fingers ran over the flesh side, out of habit. Precisely. She knew what to do with the hide. Her hands remembered. The blacksmith's wife. She mended harnesses and sewed. Dong Yu said the hide was small, but if they collected 10 like it, they could sew a mitten. Warm, light. Yunji nodded. She didn't look up, but she took the hide and tucked it into her bosom. On the evening of the 5th day, Dong Yu sat by the hearth and counted. 5 days, 4 hazel grouse, 1 vole, a decoction of bark and berries. The boy was recovering. The fever had broken. He'd started eating on his own. They had enough firewood for 4 days ahead. They had water. The knife was sharpened. 4 traps were set. 2 snares were working. But that wasn't enough. The hazel grouse would run out. Voles wouldn't feed 5 people. We need meat. Real meat. Deer. Or wild boar. Or at least a hare. For that, we need a bow. Or a large trap. Or another way. He thought about it until midnight. Then he found the answer. Not in Mark's memory. In Dong Yu's memory. The old hunter knew of one place. A ravine an hour's walk to the north. Deer lie down there in the winter. The snow in the ravine is deep, and the animals trample a single trail, a narrow one. If you place a log that's about to fall with a horsehair sling, the deer will walk over it, and the log will strike its legs. It won't kill it, but it will knock it down. Then a knife. He knew he couldn't drag the deer all the way by himself. The carcass had to be butchered on the spot. And here was the hiding place, the inner courtyard. He touched his chest and exhaled quietly. A space opened up. He looked closely. 3 by 5 paces. Empty. Cold. Time inside moved 10 times slower. The meat wouldn't spoil. The blood wouldn't clot. He could butcher the carcass in the ravine, put the meat in the pocket, and bring it home light. No one would see. No one would find out. He closed the space and went to sleep. Tomorrow, to the ravine. He set out at dawn on the 6th day. Sunwei said he was leaving for a few hours. She nodded. She didn't ask where. Trust he hadn't yet earned, but which she had granted him in advance. He carried a knife and a skein of horsehair, nothing else. It was an hour's walk to the ravine, for a healthy person. For him, too. He wrapped his knee tightly with a rag. It didn't help much, but it provided some support. The snow was deep, up to his thighs. He followed old tracks. Dong Yu's memory guided him like a map. Here was a turn at the split pine tree. Here was an ascent along the rocky ridge. Here was a descent to the stream that was silent in winter. He walked and counted his breaths. Inhale for 4 steps, exhale for 4. His heart was pounding too fast. On the ascents, his vision grew dark. He stopped. He waited. He walked on. He reached the ravine in 2.5 hours. He sat down on a rock. He caught his breath. He looked around. The ravine was deep, about 5 meters. The slopes were steep. The snow at the bottom was waist deep. And then he saw the trail, a well-trodden one, narrow, a single track in the snow. Reindeer passed through here every day. The tracks were fresh, from today. 3 animals, maybe 4. He determined this by the depth and width of the hooves. 2 adults, 1 smaller female, and 1 young one, about a year old, judging by the size of its stride. He climbed down into the ravine. He found the spot. The trail ran between 2 pine trees. It was narrow. An animal couldn't turn around here. He cut down a young birch tree, thin but heavy. He chopped off the branches. It turned into a log twice a man's height. Heavy. He barely managed to lift it. He tied it with a horsehair rope to the pine trunk at knee height. He stretched a tripwire across the trail. The deer is coming. It brushes the snare with its hoof. The hair snaps. The log falls and strikes its legs. The animal collapses into the snow. Now for the knife. He checked the setup. The tension is good. The hair is thin. The animal won't see it. The log is hanging just right. It will strike below the knee. It won't kill it, but it will break its leg. Jay ruthless. But hunger is crueler. He covered his tracks with a fir branch. He went back up. He sat down. He couldn't wait. He had to leave. The scent of a human would scare the deer away. They'd return to the trail in a few hours when the wind had carried the scent away. He headed back. The return trip was easier, downhill, but his legs could barely hold him up. He fell twice. The first time, he got up right away. The second time, he lay in the snow for a minute. His heart was beating erratically. A thud, a pause, two thuds, a pause. A bad sign. He stood up. He made it to the cabin. He went inside and sat down by the hearth. His hands were shaking. Sankava handed him some hot water. He drank it. She looked at him. She asked what he'd been doing in the woods for half the day. He said he'd been setting a trap for a deer. She was silent for a moment. Then she said he looked more like a dead man than a hunter. He laughed, hoarsely. He said dead men don't bring back meat. She didn't smile. He waited until evening. Then night fell. On the morning of the 7th day, he went to the ravine. He walked faster. His body had grown somewhat accustomed to it, or perhaps he'd learned to conserve his energy. He made it there in 2 hours. He went down, and he saw it. A deer lay in the snow. A young male, about a year old. A log had struck its front legs. The right one was broken. The animal tried to stand, but couldn't. It lay there, staring at Dongyu with its large, dark eyes. It was breathing rapidly. Steam rose from its nostrils. Dongyu approached. He crouched down beside it. He placed his hand on the deer's neck. The animal twitched. Then it went still. Dongyu took out his knife. He knew where to cut. Mark knew the anatomy. Dongyu knew the practice. One movement, quick, precise, the artery. Blood gushed onto the snow, hot, steaming. The deer shuddered. Its legs twitched. Then it went still. Dongyu sat nearby and waited for the animal to die. He didn't like killing, not in his past life, nor in this one. But food is food. 5 people were waiting in the cold cabin, and so he set to work. Butchering the deer took 2 hours. His hands were shaking. The knife kept slipping. But Mark knew how to cut along muscle groups rather than just into pieces. The loin separately, the shank separately, the cheeks separately, the ribs separately, liver, heart, kidneys, tongue. From a single deer, he got 12 different cuts. A local hunter would have taken 6, maybe 7. He skinned it whole, carefully, using Mark's technique, an incision along the white line of the belly, then around the legs. Then you pull it off slowly. The knife helps where the membrane is stuck to the meat. The hide came off cleanly, top grade, no tears, no cuts. Now for the pocket. He touched his chest and exhaled. The space opened up. A small barn, 3 by 5. He began to pack it away. The tenderloin, the shank, the ribs. He ran his hand over each piece before placing it inside. The space accepted it. His hands, his catch, his labor. He packed away all the meat, the offal, the hide, the bones for broth, even the hooves. You can boil glue from hooves. Glue for a bow. The space was 1/3 full. Good. He closed the pocket, stood up, covered his tracks, covered the blood with snow, removed the log, untied the rope. No traces. The hunting party from the neighboring village mustn't know that anyone hunted here. He headed back, light on his feet, no load. All the meat was inside, under his ribs, in his pocket, where time passes 10 times slower and blood doesn't clot. He walked and thought. 1 deer would last 2 weeks if he rationed it. It may be even 3. And then he could set another trap, or 2, or 3. But his body wouldn't hold up to walking down to the ravine every week. He needed help. He needed someone who could carry heavy loads, drag logs, walk long distances. Legs, young legs. Sankva. She's strong, tall, but she's needed at home. Yunji, wiry, enduring, but she's afraid of the forest. He could tell by the way she looked at the trees. Minsu. No, she has a child. He returned to the hut. He went inside, sat down by the hearth, touched his chest, took a cut of meat out of his pocket, placed it on the table. The meat was fresh, warm, as if the deer had been killed just a minute ago. The 3 women watched. Sonhua looked at the meat, then at his empty hands, then back at the meat. She didn't ask. He saw the question pass through her eyes and how she decided not to ask it. A smart woman. He cut the meat, thick slices. He placed them on the coals. The fat dripped. The smell filled the hut. The boy woke up and began to cry, not from pain, from the smell. His body remembered what real food was and demanded it. Minsu picked him up. Dongyu gave her a piece, soft, tender. A child needs a soft piece, without sinews. Minsu chewed it and gave it to her son. The boy ate greedily. He choked. He ate. Yunji ate in silence, slowly. She chewed each bite for a long time, as if she were afraid it would run out and there would be no more. Her face bore an expression Dongyu had seen before, a long time ago, in another life. on the faces of tourists found after 3 days in the mountains without food, the first piece of meat after starvation. It's not just food, it's a return to the world of the living. Sanhua ate calmly, steadily. She kept herself under control. But when she finished, she closed her eyes for a second, and in that second, everything was there. Dongyu finished his portion, the liver and heart, the most nutritious parts. He needed strength. He took more meat out of his pocket, cut it into strips, thin and long, and hung them on a stick over the fire. Sanhua asked what he was doing. He said he was smoking it. He explained, meat cut thinly and dried in smoke keeps for weeks. No salt is needed. You need the right smoke. Alder smoke, not spruce. Spruce makes it bitter. Alder makes it sweet. She listened. She nodded. She asked where he'd learned this. He said that a long life teaches you many things. She looked at him with a lingering gaze, that same one, just like on the first evening. Old Chedong-yu didn't know such things. She knew that, and he knew that she knew it, but neither of them said it out loud. He hung up the meat, put the rest back in his pocket. At night, when everyone was asleep, he sat alone by the hearth. He reached into his chest and pulled out the hide. He spread it out on the floor. He examined it. Clean, smooth, top grade. A hide like this is worth a silver coin at the winter market, maybe 1.5. But first, it had to be tanned. The flesh had to be scraped off, softened, processed. He knew how. Mark knew the chemistry of the process. An animal's brain contains lecithin. Lecithin softens the hide. It's an old method. You rub the flesh side with the brain of the same deer, leave it for a day, then knead it, then smoke it. The smoke sets it. The hide becomes soft and doesn't rot. He took the deer brains out of his pocket, put them in a bowl, mashed them up, began rubbing them into the hide. He worked until late into the night. His hands ached, his back throbbed, but he didn't stop. This hide, this is the beginning. Not just warmth, not just money. This is proof that the old man from the remote hut isn't useless, that he can give this world something it has never seen before. He finished. He rolled up the hide, put it in his pocket. It won't spoil there. The brain will keep working. Time has slowed down. 3 days outside will pass as 1 hour inside. He lay down by the hearth and closed his eyes. The 8th day. 5 of them are still alive. They have meat. They have a fire. They have a plan. He fell asleep thinking that tomorrow he needed to repair his bow, make glue from the hooves, make a bowstring from the reindeer's tendons, and start teaching Sonhwa to read tracks. On the 9th day, he made the glue. He crushed the deer hooves with a stone. He placed the small fragments of bone and cartilage in a clay bowl and poured water over them. He set it on the coals. He simmered it for 6 hours, stirring with a stick. The water thickened. It became viscous. It stretched into threads. Good glue. Mark knew the recipe. Dongyu knew the proportions. Together, they got it right on the first try. He took the bow down from the wall. There was a crack running along the upper shoulder, long, but not all the way through. He coated the crack with glue. He wrapped it with deer sinew, thin, strong. The sinew dried slowly, but once dry, it would grip the wood tightly. He twisted the bowstring from 4 strands of deer sinew, twisted it, pulled it taut. He tested the sound. It hummed evenly. A good bowstring. The bow wasn't for hunting. There were traps for hunting. The bow was for defense. The wolves were getting closer and closer. At night they howled on the hillside behind the hut. 3 voices, maybe 4. Hungry. Winter wolves. The most dangerous. They aren't afraid of fire when hunger is stronger than fear. No arrows. He carved 4 out of hazelwood. Straight. Long. Bone arrowheads. A deer's shoulder blade split into slivers, sharpened on a stone. Not iron, but it would pierce the hide from 20 paces away. He shot this bow while standing in the yard. The first arrow went 3 meters to the left of the target. His hands were shaking. His eyesight wasn't as good as it had been in his youth. He adjusted his grip. The second went a meter to the right. The third lodged itself in a pine trunk 5 steps from the mark. Useless for hunting, but enough for a wolf 10 steps away. If he doesn't miss, if his hands don't fail him. He lowered the bow and looked at his palms. They were trembling, slightly, constantly. This won't go away. It's old age. You can't overcome it with willpower. You can only work around it, he thought. He needed a crossbow. Not a bow. A crossbow doesn't require holding power. He cocked it, took aim, released the bolt. His hands might shake, the stock holds steady. Mark had seen the design in a book on medieval weapons, the simplest crossbow made of wood and rope. But that could wait. Right now, there were more important things to do. On the 10th day, he began building a water conduit. He found a birch tree 100 steps up the slope from the hut. The stream was lower down. That meant he couldn't run the conduit uphill from the stream. A different plan. He found a spot where water was seeping from the rock. A spring. A small one. A thin trickle. But it wasn't frozen. The water came from deep underground and was warmer than the air. The spring was higher than the cabin. The elevation difference was 15 meters. That would be enough. He peeled the birch bark off the tree, in large strips. The knife cut cleanly. The bark came off easily. Winter. The tree is dormant. The bark offers no resistance. He rolled the bark into a trough. He secured it with thin twigs. 1 trough, 2, 3, 7. He worked for 2 days. Songfa helped. She held the birch bark while he secured it. She carried the twigs. She didn't ask why. She saw. Water. Every day. No more walking to the stream. No more carrying heavy jugs. On the 12th day, the water conduit began to work. A thin stream of water ran through the birch bark trough from the spring to the hut and fell into a wooden trough by the door. The water was clear and cold. Yunji stood and watched. The water flowed on its own. No buckets, no ropes, no trek to the stream through waist-deep snow. She looked at the water, and her face bore the expression of someone witnessing a miracle. Not magic, a miracle of common sense. Why hadn't anyone thought of this before? Because that's not how things are done here. Here, they carry water by hand, because they've always carried it by hand, because their grandfathers carried it by hand, because their ancestors carried it by hand. And Dong Yu came and said, "Why? Water flows downhill. Let it flow." That was the beginning. Small, imperceptible. But Dong Yu knew that this is exactly how the world changes, not with loud words, a birch bark trough. The 13th day. He took Yunji under his wing, not for the work, for her sake. He noticed how she moved, quietly, along the walls, taking up no space, making no sound, like someone who's used to being beaten for making noise. He took a piece of deer hide out of his pocket, tanned, soft. The brain tanning had worked. The leather was like suede, dark, smooth. He laid it down in front of Yunji, said he needed a sheath for his knife. Leather, sturdy, the kind that would keep the knife from falling out while running. Yunji looked at the leather, then at him. He said one thing, "Do as you see fit, not as your husband said, not as your mother-in-law said, as you see fit." She took the leather, examined it. Her fingers traced the surface. She pulled an awl from her bosom, her own, an old one, with a wooden handle polished to a shine, the only thing she'd taken from her husband's house. She began to work, silently, intently. He didn't watch. He left. He checked the traps. 1 vole. He removed it. Set the trap again. He checked the snares. Empty. He moved them to a new spot. When he returned, Yunji was finished. The sheath lay on the table. He picked it up, examined it, and froze. It was perfect. Not just a sheath, a work of art. The stitches were even. Every stitch was spaced evenly. The edge was finished, so the leather wouldn't fray. She'd added a loop for the belt. Small, neat, made from a scrap of leather. Without a single word, she decided the sheath should attach to his belt and had made the fastening. He slid the knife in. It fit snugly. It didn't rattle. It didn't fall out. It fit like a glove. He looked at Yunji. She was standing against the wall. Her head was bowed. Her shoulders were hunched. She was waiting. He knew what she was waiting for. A blow. A scream. Or the silence that's worse than a scream. A silence that meant the work was no good, and why had she even tried? He said 2 words. Excellent work. Yunji looked up. She looked at him. He saw something break in her face. Not something bad. A wall. The wall behind which she had been hiding for 10 years. She turned away. She walked out. He could hear her crying in the woodshed. Quietly. For a long time. Half an hour. Sonhwa got up to go to her. Dongyu shook his head. Not now. Let her be. She needs this. When Yunji returned, her eyes were red and her cheeks were wet, but her shoulders were straight, just a little, by 2 fingers' width. But he noticed. It was the first day Yunji stopped eating with her head hunched between her shoulders. The 14th and 15th days. He taught Sonhwa, not hunting, counting. No, she already knew how to count. He taught her to count differently. He He explained the system: incoming, outgoing, stock, 3 columns. What came into the house, what went out, what remained. Every day, every item. Meat, firewood, water, berries, hides, thread. He carved a table onto a small board with a stick. Songhua watched. Then she took the stick and began filling it in herself. Her handwriting was neat, fine, like a scribe's, the scribe's daughter. He watched as she calculated, quickly, accurately, without mistakes. She finished and looked up. She asked why he needed this. He replied that a household without accounting is like a wagon without wheels. It moves, but not well. She was silent for a moment. Then she said that her father had said the same thing, in different words, but the same idea, and her voice faltered. For half a second, he didn't ask any questions. She'll tell him herself, when she's ready. He simply said that starting tomorrow, she would be in charge of the household accounts. Income, expenses, supplies, everything would go through her. She nodded, briefly, but he saw her back straighten, her chin lift slightly. She'd been given a task. Not a woman's task, not laundry or cooking, a task for the mind, for that mind that had been rotting away without work for 10 years. On the evening of the 15th day, he sat by the hearth and took stock. 2 weeks, 5 survivors, meat for 10 days, firewood for 5, water flows on its own, the knife is sharpened, the bow is repaired, 4 arrows, 6 snares, 4 nooses, 1 pelt is being tanned in his pocket. Songhua keeps track of the count. Yunji sews. Minsu is learning to make broth properly. The boy is healthy. He runs around the hut and gets in everyone's way. Good. Dongyu pulled a bundle tied with a black ribbon from under his cot. That very one. The old Dongyu's memory had refused to touch. He untied the ribbon, unfolded the hide. Inside lay a silver emblem, a tiger on a black ribbon, small, heavy, old. The Royal Hunting Guard. Mark didn't know what it was, but Dongyu's memory did, and a chill ran down his spine at that realization. 40 years ago, this old man had served the van. He'd guarded the protected forests, and he'd left after a single hunt, after a single order, after a single murder. His memory offered no details, only a feeling, heavy, dark, like a stone at the bottom of a well. He wrapped the emblem back up, hid it under the cot. Later, not now. Right now, he had to survive. He lay down and closed his eyes. Through the wall of the hut, he could hear a wolf's howl, closer than yesterday. He counted the voices. 5. There had been 3, now there were 5. The pack is growing. The hungry winter is driving them toward people. Soon, they'll come. The 3rd week. The wolves came on the 18th night. Dongyu woke up to the sound. Not a howl, closer. Footsteps, soft, heavy. In the snow by the wall of the hut. He sat up, listened. 2 beasts, maybe 3, circling, sniffing. The smell of meat. Smoked venison over the hearth. They can smell it. He stood up, grabbed his bow, an arrow. He walked to the door. He didn't open it. He listened. Claws scraped against the wood. One of the wolves tested the wall. The wood was old. The planks had dried out. Cracks a finger's width wide. Through a crack, he saw an eye. Yellow. Close. The wolf stood by the wall and peered inside. Dongyu didn't move. Behind him, Songhua woke up. He heard her sit up, quietly, without a sound. A smart woman. She doesn't scream. She doesn't panic. He raised his hand, a gesture. Don't move. She froze. The wolves circled the hut for 20 minutes. Then they left. The tracks in the morning would show how many there were. He didn't sleep until dawn. He sat by the door with a bow on his lap. An arrow knocked. In the morning, he went outside. Tracks. 5 animals. Large. Experienced. One set of tracks was larger than the rest. The leader. Its front paws were wider than Dongyu's palm. They circled the hut 3 times. They stopped at the door. One was digging in the snow by the wall, looking for a way in. It didn't find one. They headed north, toward the forest. They'll be back. Dongyu knew that for sure. Hungry wolves don't stray from the source of a scent. They're checking it out, assessing the situation, and they'll return when they decide the risk is worth the food. He needs protection, a fence around the cabin. Not very high, 1.5 meters, but sturdy, made of poles with sharpened tips. A wolf can jump 1.5 meters, but not over sharpened stakes at the top. He set to work. He chopped down young pine trees, thin, straight, about 2 fingers thick. He cut off the branches and sharpened the tops. He hauled them back to the hut. His body protested. Each tree took 10 minutes of work with an axe. He had no axe. He had a knife. A knife doesn't chop, the knife cuts. He cut, slowly, painfully. On the first day, he prepared 12 poles. Not enough. He needed at least 60. On the second day, he asked for help. Sonhwa and Yunji went out with him. Sonhwa chopped off the branches. Yunji hauled the poles. He cut the trunks and sharpened the tops. The three of them managed 25 in a day. The third day, 20 more. Rain. No, not rain. Wet snow. Heavy. Nasty. It seeped to the bone. Yunji worked without stopping. Wet. Frozen. Silently. He stopped her, said that was enough for today. She looked at him in surprise, as if she didn't understand why they should stop if the work wasn't finished. He understood. Her blacksmith husband stopped her with his fist, not with a word. Work until you drop. Then he'd beat her for falling. He said that a person isn't a tool, that rest is part of the work. She nodded, but he could see she didn't understand. Not yet. The fourth day, 57 poles. He began setting them, driving them into the frozen ground. It was hard. A rock on the top, 3 blows, 5, 10. The ground wouldn't give way. He found a solution. He poured hot water from a trough onto the spot. The ground thawed in his palm, just enough to drive the post in. By evening on the fourth day, half the fence was up. On the fifth day, the fence was finished. Rough, a bit crooked, but sturdy, 1.5 meters high, pointed tops, a gate made of 2 poles on rope loops. Not a fortress, but it'll hold off a wolf. It would give him time to draw his bow and shoot. He stood in the yard and looked at his work. Songkva stood beside him. She said the fence looked like a fortress wall. He laughed. He said a fortress wall made of sticks was all they could afford. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost. The 23rd day. He decided it was time to go to the market. The hide in his pocket had finished tanning. The brain tanning had worked. The leather was soft, light in color, not a single cut, top quality. He'd taken it out that morning while everyone was still asleep. He examined it, kneaded it with his hands. Good. He rolled up the hide. He took the smoked meat out of his pocket, 6 bundles, each about the size of his palm. He wrapped them in birch bark. The meat smelled of alder smoke, just right. No bitterness, no sourness, the perfect smoke flavor. Mark knew the process, the smoke temperature, the humidity, time. Dongyu knew which kind of firewood produced the right smoke in these mountains. Alder by the stream, young, with thin bark. It burns slowly and produces smoke that coats the meat like varnish. He got ready, a knife in a new sheath on his belt, the hide on his back, the meat in his knapsack. The journey to the county town took half a day, longer through the snow. He set out at dawn. He left instructions for Sonway. Check the traps, stock up on firewood. Don't open the gate after dark. She nodded. He walked along the trail down from the hut, past the village. Togolri was waking up. Smoke from the chimneys. Voices. Dogs. He walked along the edge of the village. Not through the center. He didn't want any prying eyes. But he was spotted. An old man from a hut on the outskirts, heading somewhere, with a knapsack. Someone called out after him. He didn't turn around. He kept walking. The trail led over a pass. Not very high, but steep. The climb was hard. His heart was pounding. His knee was burning. He stopped every 100 steps. Beyond the pass, the trail led downhill through a pine forest. 3 hours later, he came out near a small town. A small county town. 100 houses. A market square. In winter, the market was held every other day. Today was market day. He entered the square. Few people around. Winter. Cold. They mainly traded in grain and salt. A few shops selling fabric. A blacksmith. An apothecary. He found a spot in the corner of the square. He laid out his wares. He spread the hide on the snow. He placed the meat next to it. Bundles wrapped in birch bark. He waited. The first to approach was a fur trader, an elderly man with red eyes. He looked at the hide. He touched it. He turned it over. He examined the flesh side, and he froze. Dongyu saw how his face changed. The merchant had seen thousands of hides, and he saw that this one was different. The flesh side was clean, smooth, no cuts, no grease spots. The tanning was soft, even. They didn't produce this kind of quality in this province. The merchant asked where it came from. Dongyu said it was his own, from a hunt. The merchant asked who had tanned it. Dongyu said he had done it himself. The merchant was silent for a moment. Then he named his price, 1 silver coin. Dongyu shook his head, 1.5. The merchant looked at him, at the old man in a tattered jacket with gnarled hands, and saw his eyes, calm, without pleading, without need. the eyes of a man who knows the value of his wares. The merchant gave him 1.5 coins. The meat sold quickly. The blacksmith's wife bought the first bundle. She sniffed it. She tasted it. Her eyes widened. She bought 2 more. The shopkeeper bought the 4th bundle. The 5th was bought by some traveler passing through. He kept the 6th for himself. He received another 1.5 silver coins for the meat. That made 3 coins in total, in a single day, from a single deer. In the village, a family lives on 3 silver coins for 2 months. He bought a sack of barley at the market, salt, a small but valuable pouch, a steel needle for Yunji, thin, sturdy, a coil of strong rope, a large clay pot for broth. On the way back, he thought, 3 coins for a top-grade hide and 6 cuts of meat. If they set 2 traps a week and caught 1 deer a month, by spring they'd have a stockpile. Money, food, enough to pay off the village's tax debt and send the overseer away empty-handed. He walked along the trail through the pass and thought, word will get around. The merchant will spread the news. The blacksmith's wife will spread the news. Old Che Dong-gyu had come to the market with goods that had never been seen in these mountains. A first-grade hide, meat smoked in a special way. Someone will take an interest. Someone will want to find out how. Someone would want to take it away. He returned in the evening. He walked through the gate. The fence stood firm. Smoke was rising from the hut. He went inside. The boy, Jong-u, ran toward him. He grabbed his leg. He ruffled his hair. He set a sack of barley on the table. Salt, a pot. He took a needle from his bosom and handed it to Yunji. She took it. She looked at it in the light. It was made of steel, thin, new. She pressed the needle to her chest and closed her eyes. A small gesture, but Dong-gyu saw it. To her, it wasn't just a needle. It was recognition, that her skill was worth the tool, that she wasn't just a pair of hands for hard labor, that she was a master who needed a good tool. Sonhwa looked at the sack of barley and the small bag of salt. She asked how much he'd gotten for them. He said, 3 silver coins. She froze. She was silent for a moment. Then she asked how much the village's tax debt was. He replied that he didn't know exactly, but if 2 payments were overdue, it would be about 10 or 12 silver coins for their hut and plot of land. She did the math in her head. He could see her calculating. Her eyes moved. Her fingers twitched slightly. 4 months until spring. If she goes to the market twice a month, if she makes 3 coins each time, 24 coins, minus expenses, minus food, minus what doesn't sell. She looked up. She said that would be enough, if everything goes as it is now. He nodded. If. She smiled for the first time. Not widely, not openly, just the corner of her mouth, quickly, almost imperceptibly. But he noticed, and he thought that for the sake of that smile, it had been worth walking over the pass with his sore knee and back again. That evening he lay by the hearth. Min-soo was feeding Chung-woo barley porridge with salt and a small piece of smoked meat. The boy ate and swung his legs, healthy, noisy, lively. Yunji sat in the corner sewing. The needle flitted between her fingers, quickly, steadily. She was mending his jacket. She decided on her own, didn't ask, just picked it up and started. Sonhwa sat at the table, scratching at a small board with a stick. Numbers, income, expenses, stock, 3 columns. He looked at them, at these 3 women and the child. A month ago, they had stood at his door, pale from hunger and cold. Now they were eating, working, talking. Min-soo even laughed sometimes. Quietly, covering her mouth with her hand, but she laughed. He closed his eyes and thought, it looks like we'll make it to spring. The rumor spread faster than he'd expected. On the 26th day, a man came to the hut, not from their village. From a neighboring one, a burly man in his 40s with an axe at his belt and the face of a man accustomed to being feared. Kang Tae-ho, the head of the hunting cooperative. He stopped at the gate and didn't come in. He just stood there and looked. Dong-gyu went out to meet him. Kang Tae-ho looked at the fence, at the smoke coming from the chimney, at the birch bark water pipe, at the smoked meat hanging under the awning. He looked for a long time. Then he said that the forests in these mountains belonged to the cooperative, that hunting without the cooperative's permission was poaching, that poachers get beaten, and if it happens again, they'll be beaten even harder. Dong-gyu listened, silently, calmly, the face of an old Korean grandfather, respectful, attentive. Inside, Mark from Montana was weighing his options. Kang Tae-ho is wrong. The forests are state-owned, not the cooperatives. The cooperative has simply gotten used to no one arguing with them. But he can't argue now. He has no strength, no people, no connections. Dongyu bowed, deeply. He said he was grateful for the warning. He said he was an old hunter and only took small game, grouse, hares. He doesn't touch the cooperative's deer hunting grounds. He said this in an even voice, without fear and without defiance. Kang Tae-ho looked at him. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that the meat at the market was venison, that the merchant had shown him a piece and asked where it came from, that the cooperative members aren't fools. Dongyu didn't bat an eye. He said he'd bought the venison from a traveling merchant and smoked it his own way. Kang Tae-ho didn't believe him. Dongyu could see it in his eyes. But there was no evidence, no carcass, no tracks, no blood. Everything was in his pocket. Everything was clean. Kang Tae-ho turned and walked away. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't bow. Dongyu stood at the gate and watched him go. He counted his steps. Heavy, confident, the steps of a man who would return. He returned to the hut. Sonhwa stood by the window. She had heard everything. She asked who it was. He explained. A hunting party. 5 hunters. They consider the mountains their own. They don't like outsiders. She asked what he was going to do. He said he'd think about it. She nodded. The next morning, he found the first trap broken. The trigger stick was snapped in two. The stone had been knocked off. The bait was scattered. Not an animal. An animal doesn't snap a stick in half. A human. He checked the rest. The second trap was intact. The third was broken the same way. The fourth was empty but intact. 2 loops were torn. Clean. Neat. The rope hadn't been torn. It had been cut. With a knife. He sat down on a rock and thought. The gang had started sabotaging his gear. This was the first step. The second would be worse. The third, even worse. He knew how it worked. In Montana, poachers did the same thing. First, they sabotage the equipment. Then they make threats. Then they set fires. He repaired the traps. He set the snares again. But he moved everything. Further from the trails, deeper into the forest, to places where the gang members don't go, to places where you need to know the forest as well as old Dongyu did. Every hollow, every ravine, every bend in the stream. They won't find them. On the 28th day, he began making a crossbow. A bow is too unreliable for his hands. The tremor in his fingers makes aiming impossible at long distances. A crossbow solves this problem. The stock is made of oak, sturdy, heavy. It took him 3 days to carve it. Oak is hard. The knife cuts slowly. His fingers were rubbed raw and bleeding. The crossbow's limbs are made of ash, flexible, springy. Mark knew the shape, an arc, not a straight line. An arc provides more power with less tension. The bowstring is made of deer sinew, twisted in half. The trigger mechanism is very simple. A notch in the stock, a bone lever. You press the lever and the bowstring pops out of the notch. The bolts are shorter than the arrows, thicker, heavier. The tips are made of bone, sharpened to the point of a knife. He spent 5 days assembling the crossbow. Yoonji helped. She wrapped the stock in leather, tightly, evenly, each coil right next to the previous one, without gaps or wrinkles. Her hands transformed a crude weapon into something you couldn't take your eyes off. Dongyu tested the crossbow in the courtyard. The first bolt flew true. It lodged in the trunk of a pine tree 20 paces away, right in the center of the target. His hands were shaking, but the stock held steady. He fired again, and again. 3 out of 4 hits. Good. In the 4th week, the frost struck in earnest. Dongyu couldn't remember such cold, not even in the memory of his old body. The air burned his lungs. The water pipe froze. The trickle from the spring was covered in ice. He broke the ice every morning. An hour later, it froze again. The firewood burned faster. The walls of the hut were covered with frost on the inside. The boy, Chonu, coughed at night, not from illness, from the cold. Dongyu thought, the hut was too flimsy, just one wall, planks with cracks. The wind blew right through. He needed a second wall, or insulation. He remembered, Mark knew a way. Moss, dry moss packed into the cracks between the boards, and a wall of snow on the outside. Snow is insulation. The temperature inside a snowdrift is higher than outside. The Inuit build igloos out of snow, and it's warm inside. He went outside and began building a wall of snow around the hut, between the fence and the house. He cut blocks of snow with a knife, solid, compressed. He stacked them along the wall, block by block. The wall grew, 1/2 meter, a meter, 1.5 meters, all the way to the roof. He worked for 2 days. Sonhwa and Yoonji helped. Minsu stuffed moss into the cracks between the boards from the inside. He'd gathered the moss from the rocks by the stream. Dry, loose. He packed it down with a stick, tightly. When they finished, the temperature in the hut rose. Not much, but noticeably. The frost on the walls began to melt. The boy stopped coughing. Minsu sat by the hearth and stroked her son's head. She looked at Dong-yu. She said quietly that her husband had never repaired the house, that the roof leaked, that she had plugged the cracks with rags, and he had said it would do just fine. It was the first time Minsu had spoken of her husband without fear in her voice, not with warmth, with weariness, with the relief of someone who had finally stopped being afraid. Day 32, second trip to the market. He bought 2 hides, 1 deer hide and 1 rabbit hide, 7 bundles of meat, and something new, energy briquettes, made from bark, berries, rendered fat, honey he'd found in a hollow of an old oak tree on the southern slope. Old Dong-yu remembered the hollow. Bees hibernate in winter. The honey remains untouched. He took a third of it. He left the rest for the bees. Without bees, there'll be no honey in the summer. He shaped the briquettes with his hands. Small, about the size of a finger. Dense. 1 briquette keeps a person going for 4 hours. Calories, fat, fast carbs from berries, slow carbs from bark, sugar from honey. Mark used to make these for winter hikes in the Rocky Mountains. Tourists called them Montanian candies. The hide sold quickly at the market. The fur trader was waiting for him. He bought both right away. 2 silver coins. The meat sold out in an hour. 1.5 coins. He offered the briquettes to the apothecary. The old man tried one. He chewed it for a long time. His eyes widened. He asked what it was. Dong-yu said it was mountain food. For hunters, for travelers, for those who need strength for half a day. The apothecary bought 20 of them, for 1 silver coin. That made 4.5 silver coins in total, more than the first time. He bought an iron axe, a real one, heavy, with an oak handle. This will change everything. An axe means firewood. Firewood means warmth. Warmth means life. And an axe means building. New walls, new buildings, new possibilities. He bought another sack of barley, a bundle of dried fish, a piece of iron for arrowheads. The return trip was hard. The axe was heavy. The sack of barley was heavy. He walked across the pass, stopping every 50 steps, but he kept walking. As he approached the village head met him, Pak Chol-su, short, stout, with the face of a man accustomed to smiling at those stronger than himself and frowning at those weaker than himself. Right now, he was frowning. He stood on the path and looked at Dong-yu, at the axe at his belt, at the sack on his back, at the knapsack with the fish. The village head said he hadn't seen old Che in a long time, that he'd heard he had guests, 3 women, that people in the village were saying all sorts of things, that he was curious where a useless old man had gotten the money for an axe and barley. Dong-yu bowed. He said he was a humble hunter, that he took from the forest what the forest gave him, that the women helped with the housework in exchange for shelter, that the law didn't forbid sharing a roof. The village head looked at him. Dong-yu, you could see the cogs turning behind those small, shrewd eyes. The village head was calculating, weighing things up, assessing. An old man, who a month ago should have died of starvation, now stood before him, well-fed and armed with an axe. Something didn't add up. Something wasn't right. Dong-yu took a piece of smoked venison out of his knapsack. He wrapped it in birch bark. He handed it to the village headman. He said it was a gift, a sign of respect for the venerable village headman who looked after the village. The village headman took it, automatically. His hand reached out on its own. He sniffed it. He looked at the meat, then at Dong-yu. He said that 2 years' worth of taxes hadn't been paid, that the steward would arrive in the spring, that if the taxes weren't paid, they'd take the land, they'd take the hut, they'd take everything. Dong-yu nodded. He said the taxes would be paid, in full, on time. The village head blinked. He was silent for a moment. He turned and walked away. He was carrying the meat in his hand. He didn't hide it. He carried it openly, like prey. Dong-yu watched him go and thought to himself, the village head is more dangerous than the collective farm. The collective farm threatens you head on. The village head works quietly, through words, through rumors, through denunciations. If he decides that Dong-yu is dangerous, he won't come with an axe. He'll write a letter to the manager. And then, in the spring, more than one official will arrive. Soldiers will come. The 5th week. He began teaching Songhua about the forest, not about hunting. The forest. There's a big difference. Hunting is about killing an animal. The forest is about understanding where an animal lives and why it lives right here. They set out at dawn. The snow crunched under their feet. The air was clear and cold as glass. He walked ahead. She followed him, step by step, following his tracks. He stopped at the first pine tree. He pointed it out. The bark had been stripped at a height of 2 meters. He asked what she saw. She said that someone had stripped the bark. He nodded. He asked who. She didn't know. He explained. A bear. It rubs its back against the trunk. It's marking its territory. The mark is at a height of 2 meters. That means it's a large bear, a seasoned one. But the mark is old, summer. In winter, it hibernates. It's not dangerous until spring. They walked on. He stopped by an alder tree. He pointed to droppings in the snow. Small, dark, with little seeds. He asked what it was. She bent down, looked, said she didn't know. He explained. A marten. The droppings are fresh, from today. The seeds in the droppings are rowan berries, so the marten feeds on rowan berries. Rowan trees grow on the southern slope, so the marten goes to the southern slope. Set a snare here, on the trail between its den and feeding ground. Songfa listened. She memorized it. He could see how she was memorizing it. Not just the words, but the system, the connections, the causes and effects. Droppings, berries, rowan berries, south-facing slope, trail, snare. Every link in the chain is in its place. The clerk's daughter, a literate woman, a mind that had been silenced for 10 years. They walked through the forest for 3 hours. He showed her 12 signs, a fox's tracks. They differ from a dog's tracks in that the paw prints are in a straight line. A dog places its paws farther apart. A badger's burrow. The entrance is clear. That means it's inhabited. An abandoned burrow becomes overgrown with grass. A tree felled by the wind. A dry space beneath it. A shelter for small animals. Set a trap at the entrance. She memorized everything. When they returned, she sat down at the table and began to take notes. With a stick on a small board, in small, neat handwriting, 12 observations, 12 explanations. He looked over her shoulder. She wrote correctly, no mistakes. With explanations he hadn't given, she added her own, her observations. He thought that in 6 months, this woman would know the forest better than half the members of the work brigade. On the 36th day, what he had been waiting for and fearing happened. The wolves came at night, not to the hut, to the village, to the no-family sheepfold on the edge of Tagolri. He heard a scream at dawn, a woman's, high-pitched, desperate. He ran out through the gate. He looked down. People were rushing about near the no-family's house. The bleating of terrified sheep echoed from the sheepfold. He grabbed his crossbow, bolts. He kept down the slope. His knee burst with pain. He ran, limping. He fell. He got up. He ran on. He made it in 10 minutes. A woman was standing by the sheepfold, holding a child in her arms. She was screaming. A boy of about 7, unharmed, terrified. The sheepfold door was smashed open. Inside, there was blood on the floor. One sheep was dead, its throat torn open. A second was wounded. The wolves had taken the third and left. The tracks led north into the forest. 5 beasts. They came. They took it. They left. Clean, quick, like soldiers. The woman's husband stood by the sheepfold with a pitchfork and trembling hands. He didn't make it in time. He overslept. The wolves came quietly and left quietly. Dong Yu inspected the sheepfold. The door was flimsy. The bolt was flimsy. The walls were low. A wolf could have leaped over them if it wanted to. They came in through the door. Clever. One of them pressed against the door with its body until the bolt broke. The rest came in. 20 seconds for the whole thing. He looked at the wounded sheep, a laceration on its side, deep but not fatal. If he stitched it up and treated it, it would survive. He took out his knife. He cut a strip of cloth from the hem of his jacket. He washed the wound with water. He stitched it up. It wasn't pretty, but it was secure. Mark had stitched up wounds on animals dozens of times, on deer, on dogs, once on a bear cub he found in a poacher's trap. The woman watched. She stopped screaming. Her husband lowered his spear. The boy stopped crying. When Dong Yu finished, the man asked who he was. Dong Yu told him his name. The man was surprised. Old Che, the good-for-nothing, that very one. Dong Yu wasn't offended. He said the wolves would return, that the sheepfold was flimsy, that they needed to reinforce the door and install a log bolt. He said he could help if needed. The man looked at his wife. The wife looked at the stitched-up sheep. She nodded. They spent half the day reinforcing the sheepfold. Dong Yu showed him what to do. The man did it. A log across the door, 2 supports, a rope. Now a wolf couldn't push the door open with its body. It would take the strength of 10 wolves. They propped up the walls from the outside with stones. On top, they stretched a rope with tin cans tied to it, an alarm. If a beast touches the rope, the tin cans will clatter. Mark used to set these up in the national park around the tourist camps. When they finished, the man invited him to stay for lunch. Dong Yu declined, politely. He said they were waiting for him at home. The man walked him to the trail. He said his name was No Tae Gil, that he owed the old man a favor. Dong Yu said he owed him nothing. That neighbors help neighbors. But No Tae Gil looked at him for a long time, and Dong Yu saw a change in his eyes. A small one, but an important one. Yesterday, this man would have walked right past the old man from the remote cabin. Today, he remembered his name. Rumors spread. By the end of the 6th week, a woman from the village came to the hut. Not a widow, a fisherman's wife. The child was sick, a cough, a fever. The doctor in town charges a silver coin per visit. She didn't have a silver coin. She'd heard that old Che treated boys with herbs. Maybe he'd take a look. Dong Yu examined the child, a girl, 6 years old, a fever, a wet cough, deep. It's not a cold, bronchitis. Mark had seen this hundreds of times. She needs an expectorant decoction and warmth and nourishment. He gave the mother some dried bog rosemary. He explained how to brew it. He gave her a handful of energy bars for the child. Calories, fat, vitamins. The mother asked how much she owed him. He said nothing. She left. 2 days later, she came back. She brought fish, a bundle of dried river fish. She set it by the gate and left without waiting. Dong Yu stood there looking at the fish. That's how it works. Not with money, not with debts, with gratitude. Fish for the herbs, meat for help, trust for attention. He was beginning to understand how the village worked. Not by laws, by connections. Who owes whom? Who remembers whom? Who stands up for whom? Money doesn't mean anything if you don't have people behind you. And people stand up for you when you stood up for them first. On the 40th day, the frost began to ease. Just a little, by 1 degree, by 2. Icicles dripped from the roof during the day. At night, they froze again. But the air had grown milder. Winter was past its midpoint. Dong Yu sat by the hearth and took stock of their supplies. Meat for 20 days, barley for 15, salt for a month, 3 hides, ready for sale, honey, smoked meat, briquettes, money, 6.5 silver coins in a leather pouch that Songhua kept in her mattress. She kept impeccable records. Every coin was recorded. Every expense was justified. She argued with him about spending. He wanted to buy a second pot for cooking. She said the pot could wait. First, iron for arrowheads. Arrowheads mean hunting. Hunting means meat. Meat meant money. The pot could wait. She was right. He bought the iron. She smiled for the second time, and this second smile was broader than the first. The 7th week, the end of the 2nd month, Yunji spoke up. Not about business, not about work, about herself. It happened in the evening. They were sitting by the hearth. Minsu had put Jungwoo to bed. Songhua was counting. Dongyu was mending a loop. Yunji was sewing. She was sewing mittens out of vole fur, 10 pelts, small ones, sewn together so that the seams lay on the back and didn't rub her fingers. She worked in silence. Then she stopped. She looked at her hands, at the burn on her wrist, and she said that her husband had burned her with a poker because she'd put too much salt in the porridge. Her voice was even, quiet, as if she were talking about the weather. No one moved. Songhua stopped writing. Minsu opened her eyes. Dongyu didn't lift his head. He kept mending the buttonhole. Yunji said her husband beat her every evening for the first 3 years. Then he started beating her every other day. Not because he'd become kinder, because he'd get tired from drinking and fall asleep earlier. She said that when he fell into the river while drunk, she stood on the bank and watched as the current carried him away. She didn't call for help. She didn't reach out a hand. She just stood there and watched. And then she couldn't sleep for 3 months because she thought she'd killed him, that it was her fault, that standing there and watching was the same as pushing him. She fell silent. The needle in her fingers didn't move. Dongyu raised his head. He looked at her. He said that a man who beats his wife every day chooses his own death, that she wasn't to blame for anything, that standing on the shore and not jumping after the one who tormented you isn't murder, it's survival. Yunji looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, once, briefly. She went back to her sewing. Songhua reached out and placed her palm on Yunji's knee, a single movement, in silence. Yunji didn't pull away. It was the first time in 2 months that someone had touched her and she hadn't pulled away. Dongyu watched them and thought, this is more important than deer, more important than money, more important than the fence and the crossbow. 2 women whose lives had pitted them against each other and who were now sitting side by side, one holding the other's knee. That's worth more than silver. Minsu lay next to her son. Her eyes were wet. She was silent. Dongyu knew she had a story too, but she'd tell it when she was ready. Or she might not. That was her right. The next day, he went to the third market. 3 hides, 8 bundles of meat, 30 briquettes, mittens from Yunji, 2 pairs, small, neat, fur on the inside, leather on the outside, invisible seams. He placed them on the counter next to the meat. The fabric merchant's wife was the first to approach. She picked up a mitten, put it on, wiggled her fingers. She looked at the seams. She asked who had sewn them. Dongyu said a seamstress from his house. The merchant's wife bought both pairs for 1 silver coin. Dongyu didn't haggle. 1 coin for 2 pairs is a lot. She named the price herself because she could see the quality of the work. The hides brought in 3 coins. The meat, 2. 1 for briquettes, 1 for mittens. 7 silver coins in a single day. He stood in the market and counted. 13.5 coins in total, over 2.5 months. 10 or 12 in taxes. They already have more than that. He bought fabric, warm, thick, for clothes. He bought a second pot. Now Sonva won't argue. He bought oil, real oil, vegetable oil, for porridge and for leather. He bought a coil of wire, iron, thin, for snares. On the way back, they intercepted him. 3 of them, Kang Tae-ho's guild members. They stood on the trail beyond the pass, silently, 1 in front, 2 on either side. The one in front was young, broad-shouldered, with a flat face and small eyes. He said the old man trades at the market every month, that the hides are top grade, that the meat is venison, that the cooperative won't allow it. Dongyu stood before them. The old man with a knapsack on his back and a sore knee. 3 healthy men. He clutched the knapsack to his chest and said the goods were his, that he had the right, that the forests belonged to the state, not the cooperative. The young man stepped forward. Dongyu didn't back down. The young man shoved him in the chest. He fell. The knapsack flew out of his hands. The butter shattered. It spread across the snow. The cloth fell into the mud. He lay in the snow and looked up at them. The young man bent down. He said that next time he'd break his arms, and that if the old man ever went to the market with reindeer hides again, the cooperative would burn down his hut. They left. They took the pot. The oil had leaked out. The cloth was stained but intact. The wire was still in place. They hadn't found the money. He'd hidden the money in his pocket, in the inner courtyard. Strangers' hands couldn't reach it there. He lay in the snow and assessed the damage. The pot, the oil, a bruise on his chest from the shove. A trifle. The real damage is something else. They know what he's trading. They know the hides are top grade. They'll be watching. And if they see him hunting deer in the mountains, they won't come in 3s. They'll come in 5s, with axes. He stood up, picked up his knapsack, gathered up the cloth, and headed home. Songfa met him at the gate. She saw the dirty cloth. She saw his face. She didn't ask. He told her himself. She listened in silence. When he finished, she said 1 word. Plan. Not a question, not a request, a statement. She needed a plan, because without a plan, they'd lose. He nodded, sat down by the hearth, thought for an hour. Then he began to speak. The problem wasn't the hunting party. The problem was that he didn't have enough people. A hunting party consists of 5 hunters, 5 pairs of hands, 5 knives. He was just 1 old man. The 3 women don't count when it comes to knives, so fighting is out of the question. That means they need something the hunting party can't take by force. Knowledge. They can break his traps, but they can't break his skill. They can take his hides, but they can't take away the way he tans them. They can burn down his hut, but they can't burn what's in his head. He told Sanwei that it was time to change strategy. Don't trade directly. Trade through a middleman, through someone in town who would sell his goods as his own, for a cut, 20%. The cooperative won't find out where the hides come from. The merchant won't say, because it's in his interest. Sanwei nodded. She asked who. He said through the fur trader, the very same one who buys his hides, the one who knows their value, the one who stands to gain from having a steady supplier of top quality hides. She thought it over. She did the math. 20% of 7 coins is a little over 1 coin. They lose a coin on every trip, but they stay safe and keep their hands and their hut. She nodded. She said it made sense. At the next market, he didn't carry the hides himself. He went to the fur trader early in the morning, before the market opened, through the backyard. He explained the proposal. The trader listened. He thought it over. He looked at the hides Dongyu had brought, 3 of them, all top grade, all tanned identically, soft, clean. The merchant had never seen such quality from local hunters in his 30 years of business. He agreed, 20%, but on one condition. Dong Yu would supply at least 4 hides a month. The merchant would sell them as his own. The buyers wouldn't know the source. The guild wouldn't know the source. Everyone was satisfied. They shook hands. The first deal that turned a lonely old man into an invisible supplier. Dong Yu walked back, thinking, that's how it's done. Not by force, by wits. Not by a fight, by an agreement. Mark Holloway from Montana had never been a businessman, but he was a gamekeeper who had worked with people for 30 years, with forest rangers who wanted money, with poachers who wanted freedom, with officials who wanted peace and quiet. You can offer everyone what they need. The merchant needs hides. The guild needs to feel like the masters of the faute. The village head needs to feel important. The manager needs tax revenue. To each his own. And no one needs to know where the old man on the outskirts gets his top-grade pelts. The end of the 3rd month. Winter was waning. The days were growing longer. Icicles from the roof were melting by noon. It was still freezing at night, but the sun warmed things up during the day. Dong Yu stood in the courtyard and looked at the mountains. The snow on the southern slopes had darkened, loose, wet. In a month, it would begin to melt. In 2 months, grass would appear. In 3, the manager would arrive. He thought about spring and what it would bring. He had money, 17 silver coins. That would cover the tax. But manager So Young-sik wasn't just a tax collector. He's a collector of rumors. And rumors about the old man from Taegolri who does the impossible are already circulating. The merchant keeps quiet. But the blacksmith's wife told her friend. The friend told her husband. The husband told people at the market. A chain of communication that's impossible to control. He walked into the hut. Song Hwa was sitting at the table. A new wooden board lay before her. She kept track of more than just income and expenses. She kept a list of people. Who came, why they came, what they received, what they brought. She did this on her own, without being told. He looked at the list. But Taegil, the sheepfold, help. He brought a sack of barley a week later. The fisherman's wife, a child, medical treatment. She brought fish. A widow from the northern end of the village. She asked for herbs for rheumatism. She brought a skein of yarn. 7 names in a month. 7 families who now know the way to the remote hut. Song Hwa looked up and said that this was more important than money. He asked why. She said that when the manager came in the spring and asked the village head about the hut, the village head wouldn't be able to say that the old man and the widows were useless, because the 7 families will say the opposite. He looked at her. She was thinking 3 moves ahead, without any prompting, without instruction, all on her own. He asked how she knew how the government worked. She replied that her father had been a clerk at the district court, that she'd grown up surrounded by paperwork and officials, that she knew how to draft petitions and how to speak to those in higher positions, that her husband had married her for her dowry, not for her intelligence, and that after his death, her intelligence proved useless because a widow without sons has no say. She spoke calmly, without bitterness, like someone who had long since recovered from an illness and speaks of it as a matter of fact. He nodded. He said that by spring she would speak with the steward, not him, her, because she knows how to speak the language of officials. She froze. She looked at him. He saw something flash in her eyes. Not joy, fear. She was afraid, not of the manager, of herself. Afraid that she wouldn't be able to do it, that she had forgotten, that 10 years of silence had killed within her what the clerk's daughter had once known. He said she could do it, and that he would be there for her. She nodded, quickly. She turned away. He didn't look at her face. He gave her a minute. The 38th day. He took Minsu by the hand, not by her fears, but by her hands. Minsu was a former maid. She knew how to cook, clean, and do laundry, but she didn't know how to do anything that would give her a business of her own, a piece of her own name. Dong Yu decided to teach her how to make soap. Mark knew the recipe. Ash plus fat plus water. Ash produces lye. Lye breaks down the fat. The result is soap. Rough, odorless, but it cleans. Real soap. There's no soap in the village. They wash with ash and sand. Soap from the city costs as much as half a chicken. He gathered ash from the hearth, poured water over it, strained it through a cloth, got lye. Cloudy, caustic. It stung his hands. He added rendered deer fat. He heated it. He stirred it with a stick. Minsu stood nearby and watched. He explained each step. The ash must come from deciduous trees. Birch is best. Conifers produce resin. Resin gets in the way. Melt the fat slowly, over low heat. Don't boil it. Boiled fat turns yellow and stinks. The ratio, 1 part fat to 3 parts lye. Stir until it thickens. When the mixture becomes like sour cream, pour it into the molds. The molds are made of birch bark, small ones, about the size of a palm. Let them dry for a week. He gave her the molds, a stirring stick, a pot for the lye, and he said that this was now her business, her soap, her recipe. Minsu took the pot with both hands, pressed it to her stomach, looked at Dongyu and said thank you, quietly, simply, as if she weren't saying thank you for the soap, but thank you for the fact that, for the first time in her life, she had something of her own. A week later, the first bars of soap had hardened, pale, dull, odorless, but they lathered. Minsu washed Jongwoo with them. The boy squealed and kicked. Minsu laughed, out loud, openly. It was the first time in all the time Dongyu had known her. She didn't cover her mouth with her hand. She just laughed. The sound of her laughter filled the hut, and Yoonji looked up from her sewing and smiled too. A brief moment, but Dongyu remembered it as one of the best moments of his entire new life. On the 45th day, what he'd been trying not to think about happened. A child died in the village. Not theirs, a stranger's. The daughter of the Kim family from the southern end of Taegoldri, 3 years old. Pneumonia. Her mother ran to the hut at night. She pounded on the gate. She screamed. Dongyu went out. He went with her. Quickly. She was limping. He went inside the house. The child was lying on a cot. So small. So pale. Her breathing was wheezy, shallow. He touched her forehead. Hot. He felt her neck. Weak pulse. Rapid. He looked at her chest. Her ribs were pulling in as she breathed in. A bad sign. The lower lobes of her lungs. Bilateral inflammation. He knew it. Mark had seen it. No antibiotics, no oxygen, no IV. Lidum won't help. No herb will help. It's too late. Way too late. He looked at the mother. She was kneeling and looking at him with a hope that made his heart ache. He couldn't save the child. He knew that. She didn't know it yet. He stayed until morning. He built a fire. He placed a pot of hot water next to the cot. The steam moistened the air. It made breathing easier, just a little, not for long. He brewed some herbs for the mother, soothing ones, so she could cry instead of wailing. He sat next to the child and held her hand, her tiny palm in his gnarled fingers. The girl died at dawn, quietly, like a candle going out. Her mother screamed. He didn't stop her. Let her scream. Her father stood by the wall, as white as the wall itself, staring into the void. Dongyu sat and carved a wood, a small one, with outstretched wings. He carved it slowly, every little feather separately, every line. He worked for 2 hours. When he finished, he placed the bird in the girl's hands, a small lindenwood bird in her small, lifeless hands. The mother fell silent. She looked at the bird, then at Dongyu. She said nothing. He bowed and left. The morning was gray and cold. He walked through the village back to his hut, slowly, heavily. Not from fatigue, from the weight, a different weight, the kind that settles on your shoulders when you've done everything you could and it still wasn't enough. At the foot of the slope, they met him. 3 widows stood by the gate, waiting. They knew. It's a small village. Everyone knows everything. They didn't say a word. Sonhwa took the knife from his hands. Yoonji handed him a hot broth. Minsu just stood nearby. Little boy Chonwoo hugged his leg. He stood at his gate, drinking the hot broth, gazing at the morning sky, and thinking that this world is cruel, that children die, that he is neither a god nor a savior, that he is an old man with a bad knee who knows how to save 1 out of 10, and the other 9 will be lost, and there's nothing he can do about it. But he will save 1 out of 10, and for that one, it's worth getting up every morning to go sharpen his knife, set snares, and brew his decoction. On that day in Taegolri, they stopped calling him useless. Not because he brought back meat, not because he earned silver, but because he stayed in a stranger's house until morning and butchered a bird for a dead child. That meant more than all the game of the finest grade put together. The 4th month, the end of winter. Snow still lay on the ground, but had already settled. Thawed patches appeared beneath the trees. Streams began to murmur. The air smelled of earth and pine needles. The wolves grew quieter. Hunger was letting them go. Hares emerged from their burrows. Hazel grouse stopped hiding. The forest was coming to life. Dongyu stood in the yard, breathing in the morning air. His knee hurt less. His body had grown accustomed to it. It hadn't grown stronger. It had simply grown accustomed to the constant pain and stopped complaining. He had learned to conserve his movements, not to take unnecessary steps, not to waste strength on what could be done with a lever, not to lift what could be rolled. 73 years hadn't turned into 60, but they were no longer a death sentence. On the 24th day of the 4th month, the wolves came again, not to the village, to the hut, not at night, at sunset. Dong-yu was in the yard, chopping wood. He heard footsteps behind the fence. He looked up. 3 wolves were standing on the hillside, 30 paces away. They were looking at him. Gray, skinny, winter wolves, but not the ones that had come before. These were smaller, younger, from a different pack. He set down the axe, took his crossbow, stood by the gate, looked at them. They looked at him. A minute, 2, 3. They turned and walked away, silently, without fuss. They didn't run away. They walked away. He didn't shoot. There's no point in shooting a wolf that's walking away. But he knew this was a reconnaissance mission. Young wolves were scouting the territory. The older ones would follow, the seasoned ones. And somewhere in these mountains roams the gray tiger, a man-eater. People had been talking about him at the market. A hunter from a distant village had seen tracks, huge ones, wider than a palm. The tiger had come down from the northern passes and was heading south, toward people, toward livestock, toward the weak. Dong-yu knew tigers, not personally, from the memory of his old body. Che Dong-yu had seen a tiger twice in his life, once in his youth on a royal hunt, the second time 30 years ago, in those very protected forests, during that very hunt. His memory shuddered at this point and faded into the darkness. He didn't force it. The time would come and he would remember. Or perhaps not. The 5th day of the 4th month. The news came from No Tae-gil. He had run over that morning, out of breath, frightened. He said that a boy had gone missing from the Cho family at the far end of the village, 7 years old. He'd gone into the forest to gather firewood and hadn't returned. 3 hours. It would be dark in 2. His father was searching alone. People were afraid to go into the forest. Wolves. Dong-yu didn't think twice. He grabbed his crossbow, bolts, a knife. He told Sunway he was leaving. She grabbed his arm, tightly. He saw her eyes. Fear. Not for herself, for him. She said he wouldn't make it, that his legs wouldn't hold out, that he was alone and there were wolves in the forest. He gently removed her hand. He said the boy was 7 years old and alone in the forest in the dark. He said he'd come back. She let go. He set off. But Tae-gil walked beside him, with a pike. They reached the spot where the boy had last been seen, a pile of brushwood, abandoned, a rope on the ground, footprints. Dong-yu crouched down. He looked. Small footprints, boots. The left one was worn down. The boy had been walking west. Then he turned north. Then he ran. The footprints were deeper, longer strides. He was running. Why? He looked around. He found the answer 5 steps away. Wolf tracks. 2 wolves. They were moving parallel to the boy. They weren't catching up. They were driving him on. Wolves don't attack a person head on. They force him out of familiar territory. They drive him toward a place where he'll get lost and grow weak. Then they wait. The boy ran because he saw the wolves, and he ran not toward the village, but away from them, into the forest, into an unfamiliar forest, where there are no trails, where the snow is deep, where it gets dark quickly. Dong-yu followed the trail, quickly, as fast as his knee would allow, but Tae-gil was right behind him. They walked for 20 minutes. The trail led into a ravine. The boy slid down, footprints at the bottom. He fell. He got up. He kept going. Wolf tracks were above, along the edge of the ravine. They hadn't come down. They were waiting. Dong-yu walked along the ravine. It was getting dark. The light was fading. Shadows from the trees fell across the snow. Silence. Only the crunch of his footsteps, and No Tae-gil's heavy breathing behind him. He found the boy 20 minutes later. The child was sitting under a fallen tree, huddled up, hugging his knees, shivering. He wasn't crying, too scared to cry. His eyes were huge, white. He looked at Dong-yu, but didn't recognize him. Dong-yu crouched down in front of him, slowly. He told him everything was all right, that he had come, that they were going home. The boy didn't move. Dong-yu took off his jacket and draped it over the child. He lifted him up. The boy weighed as little as a feather, skin and bones. A hungry winter for this child, too. He handed the boy to No Tae-gil. He took him, pressed him to his chest. Dong-yu looked up. At the edge of the ravine, 2 yellow eyes, unmoving. A wolf sat on the edge, staring down, waiting. Dong-yu raised his crossbow, took aim. His hands were shaking. The stock held steady, but his hands were trembling. He exhaled, slowly, just as he taught the cadets in Montana, exhaling completely, A pause between heartbeats. He pulled the trigger. The bolt flew out. It whistled through the darkness. An impact. A dull thud. The wolf flinched. It yelped. It tumbled off the edge. It fell into the ravine. Thudded in the snow. Froze. The bolt had entered its neck. Right through. Clean shot. A second wolf, which Dongyu hadn't seen, darted through the bushes and vanished. The crack of branches. Silence. But Taegil stood there, pale as a sheet. He looked at the dead wolf, then at Dongyu, then at the crossbow. He said quietly that he had never seen such a weapon. Dongyu didn't answer. He stood there, trying to stop his hands from shaking. His heart was pounding. His vision was darkening. His body had reached its limit. He leaned against a tree trunk. He breathed. For a minute. 2. Then he straightened up and said it was time to go. They took turns carrying the boy, but Taegil carried the child. Dongyu carried the crossbow and the wolf's carcass. The wolf was heavy, 30 kilograms, a piece of cake for a young body. For a 73-year-old man, it was torture. He dragged the wolf along the snow on a rope. He didn't let go. The hide, meat, fat, every piece counted. They emerged from the forest in complete darkness. People were waiting for them by the village. Torches, shouts. The boy's mother rushed toward No Taegil. She snatched the child, pressed him close to her. She screamed and cried. The father stood nearby, trembling, not from the cold. He turned to Dongyu and sank to his knees, right into the snow. Dongyu helped him up. He told him to stand up, that he wasn't the kind of person people knelt before, that the boy was alive, and that was what mattered most. The village stood and watched. The old man in just a shirt, no jacket. The jacket was on the boy, with a crossbow on his back and a dead wolf on a rope. He walked through the crowd toward his path. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. They didn't praise him. They just watched, in silence. And there was more in that silence than in any words. 3 women stood at the gate, Sunhwa, Yunji, and Minsu, without torches, in the darkness, waiting. He entered. Yunji took the crossbow. Minsu handed him a hot herbal tea. Sunhwa draped a blanket over him, not his jacket, her own blanket, the only one she had. She gave him her blanket. He wanted to protest. She looked at him in such a way that he didn't. He sat down by the hearth. He drank the broth. His hands were shaking so badly that the broth splashed over the edge of the bowl. Minsu held his hands steady, gently, without a word. He finished drinking. He closed his eyes. He lay down by the hearth. He fell asleep instantly, as if he'd fallen into a pit. In the morning, he woke up and couldn't get up. His body had given out, completely. His legs wouldn't move. His back wouldn't straighten. His knee had swollen so much that his pant leg wouldn't button. He lay there, staring at the ceiling. Sunghwa sat beside him. She said he'd be lying there all day today, that she'd check the traps, that Yunji would chop some firewood, that Minsu would cook porridge, that he had nothing to do but lie there. He wanted to object. She looked at him again with that same look. He didn't. He lay there all day. The boy Chonu brought him the wooden horse that Dongyu had carved for him a week ago. He placed it next to him on the cot. He said the horse would watch over him. Dongyu looked at the boy, then at the horse, then at the ceiling, and he thought that in his past life he had had neither a wife nor children, and that this might be a pretty good second chance. He lay there for 3 days. On the 4th day, he got up. His legs held him up. His knee was swollen but bent. His back had straightened halfway. That was enough. Over the course of those 3 days, Sunhwa checked the traps herself. 2 hares, 1 hazel grouse. She brought them back and skinned them, roughly but correctly. Each cut made it a joint. Each hide pulled off like a stocking. She was a quick learner, faster than he'd expected. During those days, Yunji sewed him a new jacket, made of deer hide, soft, lightweight, warm. Fur on the inside, leather on the outside, double-stitched seams. She didn't ask for his measurements. She took his jacket off while he slept and used it as a template. He put it on. It fit like a glove. Every seam was in the right place. The sleeves were the right length. The shoulders weren't tight. On the left shoulder was a loop for a crossbow strap. She'd added it herself, because she'd seen how he carried his weapon. He looked at Yunji. She was standing by the wall. Her head wasn't bowed. Her shoulders weren't hunched. She was looking straight at him, waiting for his assessment. Not out of fear, out of pride. He said it was the best jacket he'd ever worn in both of his lives. She didn't understand the part about both lives, but she smiled, for the 3rd time in 4 months. And this smile was the widest yet. The 5th month, spring. The snow melted quickly. Streams roared. The trails turned to mud. The earth emerged from beneath the snow, black, rich, alive. Dong Yu stood on the hillside and looked down. The village was waking up after winter. People were coming out onto the streets, repairing roofs. They patched fences. They dug vegetable gardens. He thought about the land, about the clearing half a kilometer south of the hut. Flat, sunny, sheltered from the wind by a rocky outcrop. Good soil, untilled. No one had plowed it. He went there. He took a look around. The soil was dark, loose, a thick layer of humus from fallen leaves. A gardener's dream. He returned. He told Sunway that they would plant there in the spring. She asked what? He said cabbage, radishes, garlic, onions, and something else. Wild pepper. He'd found it on the southern slope. Small bushes with tiny red pods. Spicy, burning. The locals knew this plant, but didn't grow it. They considered it a weed. Mark knew the value of the pepper. Vitamin C, capsaicin, a preservative, medicine, a spice. Pepper plus cabbage plus garlic plus salt equals kimchi. Kimchi is a food that keeps for months. It cures scurvy, it warms you up in winter. It's expensive in the city because they don't make it in the mountains. Sonway listened and took notes. Vegetable garden, cabbage, radish, pepper, kimchi. She asked who would do the digging. He looked at her, at Yunji, at Minso, at himself. 4 people. 1 old man with a bad back, 3 women. 200 square paces of virgin soil. He said they'd manage. She didn't argue. They started digging the next day. The soil had thawed to the depth of a bayonet. Deeper down, it was still frozen. Enough. He dug. 20 shovel strokes, then a break. There was no shovel, just a flat stone on a stick, tied with a rope, a primitive tool. But it worked. Sunhwa dug beside him, silently, methodically. Yunji hauled rocks away from the clearing. Minso loosened the dug-up soil with a stick. The boy, Jungwoo, was collecting worms. He had a whole handful. He pointed out each one and gave it a name. Dongyu watched this and thought that worms in the garden were a good sign. The earth was alive. On the 3rd day of digging, No Tae-gil arrived, with a shovel, a real one, made of iron. He said he'd heard that old Che was tilling virgin soil with a stone on a stick, that it wasn't right, that he had a second shovel and it was just sitting there unused. Dongyu looked at the shovel, then at No Tae-gil. He was standing there, crumpling his cap in his hands. A strapping man. He was as shy as a little boy. Dongyu took the shovel. He said thank you, but Tae-gil just nodded. He stood there for a moment. Then he took off his jacket and started digging. No one had asked him to. He dug for 2 hours. Then he left. The next day he came back, and the day after that. Not alone, with his brother. His brother was younger. Quietly. He dug without stopping. By the end of the week, the garden was ready. 200 square paces of tilled earth. Dongyu stood at the edge and watched. The black soil smelled of spring. He planted cabbage, radishes, onions, garlic, wild pepper. He had collected the pepper seeds in the fall. Old Dongyu's memory remembered the bushes. Mark knew how to germinate the seeds. Soak them for a day in warm water, plant them shallowly, water them, wait. By the middle of the 5th month, the sprouts had broken through. Small, green, alive. Minsu stood over the garden bed and looked at them as if they were her children. On the 6th day of the 5th month, a man came to the hut whom Dongyu wasn't expecting. A woman, alone, on foot, with a knapsack on her back and a protective tattoo on her wrist. Thin, with eyes that had seen too much. She stood at the gate and said nothing. Dongyu came out. He looked at her, at the tattoo. Something stirred in his memory. Not in old Dongyu's memory, in his own. Markov's. A distant, vague, a face. Not this face, but a similar one, or this tattoo. He couldn't grasp the memory. It slipped away like a fish in murky water. The woman introduced herself. Ha-in, an herbalist from a mountain temple. She said she'd left because she'd been accused of witchcraft, that she was heading south, that she'd heard from people at the market about an old man in the mountains who heals with herbs and does things they'd never seen around here, that she had nowhere else to go. Dongyu looked at her, at the tattoo, at her hands, slender, strong. The hands of someone who'd spent 20 years grinding roots and mixing powders. He stepped aside. He said one word. Come in. Ha-in entered. She set her knapsack against the wall. She looked at the hut, at the hearth, at the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, at the smoked meat, at Songhua, who was sitting at the table with an account book, at Yunji, who was sewing, at Minsu, who was washing Jongwoo in a wooden trough with homemade soap, at this whole little household, which 4 months ago had been an empty hut with frozen porridge on the table. She turned to Dongyu and said he didn't seem like the person they described him as. He asked who they described him as.
She said that at the market, people talk about a mad old man who lives with 3 widows and tans hides the way no one else in the province does.
He laughed, a dry old man's laugh, and said that crazy was putting it mildly. Ha-In didn't smile. She looked at him intently, too intently, like someone searching for something specific and having almost found it. Han stayed. For the first 2 days, she was silent. She sat in a corner, she sorted through her herbs, she divided them into little bags, she sniffed them, she tasted them on her tongue. She worked. On the 3rd day, Dong Yu approached her. He sat down next to her. He looked at her little bags, 23 types of herbs. He recognized 15. Dong Yu's memory knew 10. Mark's memory added 5 more. There were 8 he didn't know. He pointed to one little bag. He asked what it was. Ha-In looked at him. She raised an eyebrow. She said it was gentian root, for the stomach. He nodded. He pointed to another one. She said it was dried skullcap, for inflammation. He nodded again. He pointed to the 3rd one. She said it was aconite, poison. In small doses, a painkiller. In large doses, it kills. He looked at her.
She looked at him. He said that aconite contains aconitine and that the lethal dose for a human is 2 milligrams. She froze. She was silent. Then she said that no village hunter knows the word aconitine. He didn't answer. She didn't press the issue. But from that moment on, an unspoken agreement was established between them. She doesn't ask how he knows what he knows. He doesn't ask why she came here, of all places. They began working together. They argued every day about herbs, about dosages, about preparation methods. She insisted on lunar cycles. He insisted on drying temperature. She believed that a full moon enhanced the root's potency. He said that a full moon had no effect on alkaloids. She got angry. He laughed. Songhua sat in the corner and wrote down their arguments, every point, every recipe, every dosage. She was keeping the first herbalist journal in these mountains, one without lunar cycles or alkaloids, just herbs, illness, dosage, method, result. Dong Yu showed Ha-In the inner courtyard, not right away, a week later, when he decided she could be trusted. He pulled a bunch of bog rosemary from his pocket, picked a month ago, fresh, green, as if it were from yesterday. Hain took the bunch. She sniffed it. She touched the leaves, soft, alive. Picked a month ago, but fresh. She looked up. There was no surprise in her eyes. There was hunger. The hunger of a person who, for 20 years, had lost half of her harvest because the herbs dry out. They spoil. They lose their power. And now, standing before her, was a man who could preserve them forever. She asked one thing. How long? He said, since birth. It was true, since the birth of this body. She nodded. She said that at the temple they spoke of such people, those who possess an inner courtyard. She said they were being sought, that a man in the capital pays in gold for information about them, that she'd heard a name but couldn't remember it, or didn't want to remember it. Dong Yu listened, silently. The man in the capital who gathers the gifted, manager So Yon-sik, who gathers rumors, the silver tiger on a black ribbon beneath the lounger, the threads stretching from different places toward a single knot. He chose not to think about it right now. It's spring now. Now it's time for the vegetable garden and taxes, and the manager who'll arrive any day now. The 6th month, the beginning of summer, the vegetable garden had produced its first sprouts. The cabbage had sprouted large, fleshy leaves. The peppers had bloomed with small white flowers. The radishes had pushed their thick white roots out of the ground. The garlic stood like a green wall. Minsu walked among the rows every morning. She watered them, she weeded them, she talked to the plants. Chongmu ran after her. He had learned to tell the weeds from the seedlings and pulled them out with a serious expression. Hayun worked on her own plot. She had set up a medicinal herb garden next to the main one, 20 kinds of herbs, each in its own place, according to light, according to moisture, according to its neighbors. She knew which plants helped each other and which stunted one another's growth. Dongyu watched and learned. She was a master at this. He knew chemistry, she knew the life of plants. Together, they accomplished things neither of them could have done alone. Their goods became well known at the market. The fur merchant sold the hides as if they were his own, but buyers remembered the quality. They came from neighboring counties. They asked, "Where does this tanning come from?" The merchant remained silent. He smiled. He counted his coins. Youngji now sewed not only for the household, mittens, belts, wallets, sheaths. Each item was one of a kind. Every stitch was perfect. The fabric merchant took them on consignment. He paid fairly. Youngji received her coins, her own, not shared money, not household money, her own.
She kept them in a little pouch against her chest. She didn't spend them, she just carried them. She knew they were there. That was enough. The household was growing. The hut had become cramped. 5 adults and a child in one room. Dongyu began building an addition, a second room, made of logs, with the help of Notaegil and his brother. 3 days for the walls, 2 days for the roof. A roof of poles and birch bark, not permanent, but it would last through the summer. In the fall, she'd replace it with a proper one. Sonhua moved her desk into the new room, her ledger, her little slates with notes. She sat at the table and managed the business. Income, expenses, stock, debts, debtors, connections. She had grown from a bookkeeper into a manager, without a title, without a rank, in practice.
Dongyu hadn't appointed her, she had appointed herself. He simply didn't stand in her way. On the 12th day of the 6th month, the manager arrived, with Yun-sik, on horseback, with 2 assistants. A quiet man with long fingers and attentive eyes. He stayed at the village headman's house. Park Chul-soo bustled about. He bowed. He offered the best room and the best food. The district administrator accepted everything with the expression of a man who had seen it 1,000 times and had long since lost interest. They collected taxes for 2 days. The village paid dearly, coin by coin, sack by sack. People gave their very last. Dongyu arrived on the 2nd day, with Sonhua. She was carrying a small bag of silver. He walked beside her, wearing a new deerskin jacket, with a crossbow on his back. Not as a threat, just out of habit. The village head saw them and turned pale. He hadn't expected this. Sonhua approached the administrator's table. She bowed, neatly. Not too low, not too high. The bow of a scribe's daughter who knows the protocol. She introduced herself. Che Sonhua, housekeeper of Che Dongyu's estate. She placed the pouch on the table. 12 silver coins. 2 years' worth of taxes. More than enough. Manager So Yun-sik looked at the coins, then at Sonhua, then at Dongyu. His long fingers sorted through the coins. He examined each one. He tested each one with his teeth. He looked up. He looked at Songhua. He asked where the money came from. She answered, hunting, tanning hides, smoking meat, craftsmanship. Her voice was steady, calm, without a tremor. The voice of a woman who knows every figure by heart and can name any one at any moment. The manager listened. He nodded. His face was expressionless. Then he turned to the village head. He asked why, in last year's report, the Che farm had been listed as non-viable and recommended for liquidation. The village head opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said that circumstances had changed. The manager looked at him for a long time. Then he turned to Dongyu. He asked if he could see the farm. Dongyu bowed and said he would be delighted to show the honorable manager around. They walked up the slope toward the hut. The manager walked in silence. He looked at the fence made of sharpened poles, at the birch bark water conduit, at the outbuilding made of fresh logs, at the vegetable garden where the cabbage stood knee-high, at Haines' medicinal herb patch, at Yunji's workshop with hides and skins hanging from the rafters, at the smoked meat under the awning, at all this property that hadn't existed 4 months ago. He went inside. Haines served tea, herbal tea, made from mountain flowers, fragrant. The manager drank slowly. He looked at Dongyu, at his hands, at his eyes, too intently, just like Hain on the first day, just like Songhua on the first night. He asked how old Dongyu was. Dongyu said 73. The manager nodded. He was silent for a moment. Then he asked if Mr. Che had ever served at court. Dongyu froze for half a second. The memory in his old body shuddered. The silver tiger, the black ribbon, the protected forests of Wan. He replied that he had not, that he was a simple hunter, that he'd spent his whole life in the mountains. The steward looked at him. He sipped his tea. Then he stood up. He bowed. He said that the estate was exemplary, that the tax had been accepted, that there were no complaints, and he left. At the gate, he stopped. He turned around. He looked at the hut. At the threshold stood 6 people, and he left without saying another word. Dongyu stood and watched him go. Songhua stood beside him. She said quietly that the manager knew. Dongyu asked what exactly he knew. She said she didn't know exactly what, but he knew something, or was looking for something, and he had found more than he expected. Summer, the 7th month. The vegetable garden was bearing fruit. The cabbages had swelled into tight heads. The peppers had turned red. The radishes had grown as thick as a hand. The garlic had dried and hung in braids under the awning. Minsu was harvesting with the look of someone who couldn't believe her own eyes. She had planted, she had watered, she had weeded, and now she was harvesting, her own, from the soil she had dug herself. Chong-U carried the heads of cabbage and dropped them every few steps. She didn't scold him. She laughed. Dong-Yu began fermenting kimchi, a large pot, cabbage, salt, garlic, wild pepper, fish brine from dried fish he'd set aside back in the winter. Mark knew the biochemistry of fermentation, lactobacilli, an acidic environment, storage temperature. Dong-Yu knew the flavor, how much salt, how much pepper, how to cut it, how to layer it.
He put the first pot of kimchi in the courtyard. The temperature there is constant. Fermentation will proceed slowly and properly. 2 weeks outside will be equivalent to 1.5 days inside, the ideal time for young kimchi. He took the pot out 2 weeks later. He opened the lid. A sour, spicy, and garlicky smell hit him. Just right. He tasted it. Crunchy, spicy, with a hint of sourness, vitamin C, anti-scurvy, warming. He offered some to Hyun. She chewed slowly. She raised her eyebrows. She said it was better than anything she'd eaten at the temple in 20 years. Kimchi became a commodity, small pots, sealed with wax. At the market, they'd sell out in half a day. The merchants' wives were the first to buy, then the husbands, then passers-by. By midsummer, they had 4 regular customers who placed orders in advance. The household earned 5 silver coins a month, consistently, not counting the hides that went through the middleman. By the 8th month, Dong-Yu decided it was time to deal with the gang. Not to fight, not to hide, to deal with them. Kang Tae-ho and his men hadn't touched the trap since spring. They knew Dong-Yu was selling through the bottles, but they couldn't prove it. And they couldn't find where he was hunting. The snares and nooses were set in places the gang members didn't know about, in ravines and hollows that only old Dong-Yu's body remembered. But the world cannot be built on enmity. Mark knew that. 30 years in the national park had taught him that you could fight poachers forever, or you could turn them into gamekeepers. The latter works better. He went to see Kang Tae-ho, alone, unarmed, to his house in the neighboring village. Kang Tae-ho came out to meet him, sullen, wary. Dong-Yu bowed. He said he hadn't come to argue. He'd come to make a proposal. He took a hide out of his knapsack, a deer hide, top grade, and placed it on the table. He said he was ready to teach the cooperative how to tan hides, brain tanning, and the technique of butchering by muscle groups, a method of smoking without salt. Everything he knew, for free. There was one condition. The guild would recognize his right to hunt in the mountains above Tagolri. The southern slopes belonged to the guild. The northern slopes were his. To each his own. Kang Tae-ho remained silent. He looked at the hide. He touched it. He crumpled it. He knew its quality. 30 years of hunting. He knew that a hide like this was worth twice as much as what his men produced. And if his men learned to make them the same way, the guild would become richer, much richer. He was silent for a long time. Then he said that the old man had broken his son's trap that winter. Dong-Yu calmly replied that it was his men who had broken the old man's traps. Kang Tae-ho was silent again. Then he smiled, for the first time Dong-Yu could remember. This, he said, that the old man was no slouch. They came to an agreement. The northern slopes belonged to Dong-Yu. The southern slopes belonged to the cooperative. Training once a week, in the clearing between the villages. Kang Tae-ho sent 2 young hunters. Dong-Yu taught them how to butcher game. 3 sessions. The first, the knife follows the muscle fibers, not across them. Cut along the fascia, not through the meat. That way the meat doesn't tear and doesn't lose its juices. Every cut is even and market ready. Second lesson, you start skinning not from the tail, but from the white line on the belly. Make a shallow incision along the subcutaneous fat. The knife barely touches the flesh. Pull slowly. Where it sticks, use your fingers, not the knife, to help. Your fingers can feel the boundary between the skin and the meat. The knife cannot. Third, brain tanning. Mash the brain into a paste. Rub it into the flesh, evenly, in a thick layer. Roll it up. Set it aside. The time depends on the thickness of the hide. A day for deer, 2 days for a bear. Then knead it for a long time, an hour, 2, until it becomes soft. Then smoke, alder smoke, cold smoke, not hot. Hot smoke cooks the hide. Cold smoke sets it. The young hunters listened with their mouths agape. They'd been hunting their whole lives. Their fathers had been hunting their whole lives. None of them knew even half of what the old man was telling them in a single lesson. Kang Tae-ho arrived for the 3rd session. He stood off to the side. He listened. He watched.
Then he walked over. He crouched down nearby and began to listen like everyone else, silently, intently, gritting his teeth, because learning from the old man he'd wanted to beat up that winter was humiliating. But turning down knowledge that would double the cooperative's income would be foolish, and Kang Tae-ho was a tough man. But not a foolish one. By the end of the 9th month, the cooperative had tanned its first hide using the new technique. 2nd grade quality, not 1st grade, but better than anything they'd made before. Kang Tae-ho brought Dong-yu a piece of bear meat. He silently placed it by the gate. He didn't come inside. He didn't bow, but he brought it. That was more than a bow. Fall of the 2nd year, 14 months since the day Mark Holloway woke up in a stranger's body. The settlement had grown from a single hut to 4 buildings. The main house, Yoonji's workshop, Ha-in's apothecary, the smokehouse. The fence had been extended. The gate was new, sturdy, made of logs. 2 dogs were running around the yard, a red one and a gray one. Hunting dogs, half wild. They'd wandered in on their own. Dong-yu had fed them, taught them commands. They went with him into the forest and flushed game from the undergrowth. The boy, Chon-woo, had grown up. 6 years old, skinny, quick. He set snares himself, small ones, for voles. Dong-yu had been teaching him for 3 months. The boy picked things up right away. His hands were nimble, his eyes were sharp. He would become a hunter, if he wanted to. At the end of the 10th month, the 6th one arrived at the hut, with Eri, 19 years old, the younger sister of the manager, So Yeon-sik, on horseback, dressed in men's clothes, with a bruise under her eye and a split lip. She dismounted at the gate. She looked at Dong-yu. She said she'd run away from home, that she'd been sold into marriage to an official twice her age, that when she refused, they made her understand with a fist, that her brother hadn't intervened, that she had nowhere to go, that she'd heard about an estate in the mountains where they take those who have nowhere to go. Dong-yu looked at her, young, educated. She spoke in literary language. Her hands were callus-free. Her back was straight, even with the bruise under her eye, defiant, frightened, angry. He said, "Come in." Arium turned out to be useless during the first week. She didn't know how to cook. She didn't know how to sew. She didn't know how to dig. She didn't know how to chop wood. She didn't know how to do anything needed on a farm. She had been raised as an ornament. She had been taught to play the kayajim, to read poetry, to draw, to write in beautiful handwriting. None of that puts food on the table. She suffered because of it. Dong-yu saw it. She sat in the corner and watched Min-soo cook, watched Yoonji sew, watched Songhwa do the math, watched Ha-in mix herbal decoctions. Everyone was busy. Everyone was needed. Not her. On the 3rd day, she approached Dong-yu. She said she was useless, that she'd come for nothing, that she was just living off others' bread. Dong-yu was silent for a second. Then he asked if she knew how to write. She looked at him as if he were crazy. She said of course she did, that she'd been writing since she was 3, that even the calligraphy teacher at the county court had praised her handwriting. He nodded. He handed her some small wooden tablets. He said he needed someone to write everything down, every herb that Hyun knew, every recipe, every tanning method, every sign of the forest, every species of tree and its properties, every animal and its habits. All the knowledge that lived in the minds of 5 people, knowledge that would die with them if it wasn't recorded. A scientific journal of the estate. Aram took the tablets. Within a week, she had filled 20. After a month, 50. She followed Kane and wrote down every word. She sat next to Yoonji and sketched patterns. She went into the forest with Dong-yu and described every landmark, every track, every trap. She systematized everything. She divided it into sections: herbs, animals, crafts, food, medicine. She created an index for each section, cross-references. From the chaos in their minds, she created order on the wooden slats. Dong-yu watched her work and thought he was looking at the first encyclopedist of these mountains. Aryum stopped feeling useless after a month and a half. When Hain came to her and asked her to find a recipe for a decoction in the notes that she had forgotten, Aryum found it in a minute. Hain looked at her and said that the girl was more useful than 3 bookcases. Aryum blushed. Then she straightened up. Then she smiled. Autumn was coming. The days were getting shorter. The nights were getting colder. Dong-yu wasn't afraid of his second winter. He had 4 months' worth of supplies: meat in his pocket, kimchi in pots, grain in sacks, firewood stockpiled. The house was insulated. He had clothes. He had money. 20 silver coins in a pouch Songhwa kept. But the gray tiger gave him no peace. Rumors had been circulating all summer. The beast had killed a cow on a distant pasture. It had killed 2 dogs near the village beyond the pass. A hunter from a distant cooperative had found the remains of a man, a traveler, torn apart and gnawed on. The tiger was coming down from the mountains, heading south toward Taegori. Dongyu had been preparing for 6 months, ever since spring. He had studied the tiger's trails. His old memory knew them well. Mark added logic. The tiger travels along the ridges, along the mountain range. It comes down to the water in the morning and evening. It lies in the thickets on the sunny side during the day. It hunts at night. Every tiger has a territory, and every territory has narrow points, passes, bottlenecks, where the ridge narrows between the cliffs, where there's only one path and no place to turn off. He found 3 such places. He examined each one. He chose the best one. A rocky pass an hour's walk north of Taegori. Narrow, 4 paces wide, rocks on either side. The tiger will come this way because there's no other path to the village. He built a trap. Over the course of a month, a pit, a deep one, 3 times a man's height. Sharp stakes driven into the bottom. On top, a platform made of poles, thin ones, covered with leaves and earth, invisible. The tiger weighs more than a man. The platform can hold a man, but not a tiger. On either side of the passage are 3 torches on ropes. Pull the rope and the torches fall into oil. A flash. Fire. The tiger is afraid of fire. It will run from the fire. It will run down the passageway, straight onto the platform. He positioned his men, Kang Tae-ho and 2 foremen at one end of the passageway, but Taegil and his brother are at the other end. Dongyu is on the rock with a crossbow. Sonhwa is next to him. She insisted. He didn't argue. They waited 3 nights. On the 4th night, the tiger came. Dongyu heard it before he saw it. Heavy footsteps, soft but heavy. The ground trembled slightly. He saw a silhouette, huge, gray in the moonlight, gray-haired, old, with scars on its muzzle. The beast feared by all the mountains. It walked down the path, calmly, confidently, the master. Everything belonged to it. Dongyu tugged on the rope. The torches fell. The oil flared up. A wall of fire rose behind the tiger's back. The beast roared, a sound that made his insides clench into a fist. He lunged forward, down the passageway, toward the platform. The platform creaked, a crack, a roar. The tiger fell into the pit, a thud, silence. Then a roar, wild, agonizing. The stakes had pierced its body. The beast thrashed at the bottom of the pit. The stakes snapped. It rose and fell, rose and fell. Dongyu raised his crossbow. He aimed downward. Moonlight illuminated the pit. The tiger lay on its side, 3 stakes in its body. It was breathing hoarsely. It looked up with yellow eyes. Dongyu fired. The bolt entered behind the ear, clean, deep. The tiger flinched. Its paws twitched. It went still. Silence hung in the air for a minute. Then Kang Tae-ho shouted from below, "Ready!" Dongyu lowered his crossbow. His hands were shaking. Sonhwa stood beside him. He could feel her shoulder against his. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there beside him. They hauled the tiger out that morning. 8 men on ropes. The beast weighed as much as 3 deer. Its coat was gray with black stripes. Huge. Dongyu skinned it himself, using his own technique. It took 3 hours. The hide came off clean, first rate. They carried the tiger through the village. People came out of their houses. They watched. They were silent. Boys ran alongside. Old men shook their heads. Women pressed their hands to their chests. The gray tiger, the man-eater, dead. Village headman Park Chol-soo stood by his house and watched. His face was pale. He understood what was happening. The old man he had wanted to starve to death had killed the beast that the entire province feared. His world had been turned upside down, and it would never be the same again. The gray tiger's pelt was drying on a frame in the yard, gray with black stripes, huge. People came to look at it. From Taegori, from neighboring villages, from the county town, they came and stood in silence. They touched the pelt and shook their heads. Then they looked at the hut, at the fence, at the vegetable garden, at the smokehouse, at the 5 women who walked around the yard like mistresses of the house, not like refugees. And they would leave, taking with them a story they would tell back home, about the old man in the remote hut. Dongyu knew this was a problem. Rumors would reach the capital, to the man who gathers the gifted, to the official whose name is never spoken. But that would come later. Now it was autumn. Now it was time for winter supplies, kimchi in jars, and firewood under the shed. Now the house was full of people who, a year ago, didn't know if they would live to see the next day.
On the third day after the tiger hunt, the village council came to the hut. Not all of them, just the elders, 6 men, led by village head Park Chol-su. They stood at the gate. Dong-yu came out. He bowed. He invited them in. They didn't come in. They stood there. The village head spoke. He said that the village thanked Mr. Che for ridding them of the beast. The words came with difficulty. Each one felt like a stone in his mouth. He was used to humiliating this old man, used to treating him like trash, and now he was standing at his gate, thanking him? Then he said that the village wanted to discuss one matter, the 3 widows living on the Che estate, women who had no legal status, who, by the village's standards, belonged to no one. The village assembly wants to determine their status. Dong-yu remained silent. He waited. He knew where the conversation was headed. The village head said that if Mr. Cho took them under his name as members of his household, the village would recognize their status. They would cease to be widows. They would become members of the Cho household, with rights, with a name, with protection. Dong-yu looked at Sonhwa. She was standing behind him. Her face was calm. Her eyes were bright. She knew this moment would come. She had been waiting for it. Dong-yu turned to the village head. He said he accepted them, but not 3, 5. Sonhwa, Yunji, Minso and her son, Ha-in, Adim. Everyone who lives under his roof. Everyone in the Cho household. The village head blinked. 5. 2 of whom are not widows. One was a runaway herbalist. The other was the manager's sister. He opened his mouth to object. He looked at Dong-yu, at the tiger skin behind him. He closed his mouth. He nodded. He said he accepted the proposal. Then Dong-yu did something the village head didn't expect. He asked Sonhwa to step forward. She stepped forward. She stood next to him, upright, tall, with an account book in her hands, which she held like a shield. Dong-yu said that Mrs. Cho Sonhwa was the stewardess of the Cho estate, that all matters concerning trade and the household were decided through her, that her word was his word. The village head stood there. He looked at her, at the woman he had crossed off the list of the living a year ago, the woman he had barred from the well, the woman for whom he had locked the granary, and the woman he now had to address as Mrs. Cho. He bowed, to her, deeply, not all the way to the ground, but deeply, and that bow said it all. The end of the old world, the beginning of a new one, a world in which a widow with an account book carries more weight than a village headman with a seal. The village meeting had ended. Dong-yu stood in the courtyard. 5 women stood beside him, Sonhwa, Yunji, Minso, Ha-in, Aryum, and the boy Jong-woo, who was holding onto Dong-yu's pant leg and asking when they would go set snares. He looked at them, at each one. Sonhwa stood upright. Her chin was raised. Her eyes were dry, but her hands clenched the ledger so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Yunji stood next to Sonhwa. Her shoulders were squared. The burn on her wrist was visible beneath her sleeve. She wasn't hiding it anymore. Minsu held Chonu close and smiled, openly, without her hand over her mouth. She was just smiling. Hyun stood slightly to the side, with a mocking smile. She looked at Dong-yu with that same gaze. She knew, maybe not everything, but she knew he wasn't who he claimed to be, and she accepted him as he was. Aryum stood last, with small slates in her hands, because she was writing everything down, even this moment. She'd write it down later. Every word the village elder spoke, every bow, every face. She had become the chronicler of this house, and this house had become worthy of being chronicled. A week passed, then another. Autumn gilded the mountains. Leaves fell and settled on the ground like a russet blanket. The air smelled of mushrooms and decaying foliage. Dong-yu walked through the forest and prepared winter supplies. He dried mushrooms, he smoked meat, he fermented kimchi. He filled the courtyard to the brim. The space had grown, not by much, just a palm's width, but it had grown. Every new craft he mastered to the level of a master expanded it. Kimchi, soap making, crossbow making. 3 new skills in a year, 3 palms worth of space. One evening, he pulled a bundle tied with black ribbon from under his lounger. A silver tiger. He sat down by the hearth. He unwrapped it. He placed the token on his palm. And the memory came, all of it, at once, like an avalanche. 40 years ago, the young gamekeeper, Che Dong-yu, the royal guard, the protected forests, the king's order, to find the gifted one, a man, a hermit, living alone in the mountains. His gift is a threat to the crown. Eliminate him quietly. Young Dong-yu found him, an old man, skinny, with kind eyes. He lived in a cave. He grew herbs. He healed the village children. His inner courtyard was enormous, like a house, and the old man used it for only one purpose. He stored medicine there, for those who came to him sick and left healthy.
Dong Yu killed him with a knife, quickly, just as he'd been taught. The old man didn't resist. He looked at him, smiled, placed his hand on Dong Yu's chest, and died. And the gift passed to the killer, like a curse, like an inheritance, like a mission. Carry it until you find someone to whom you can give it with a pure heart. For 40 years, Dong Yu carried it. He didn't use it. He couldn't. Because every time he touched his chest and felt that space, he saw the old man's kind eyes and the knife in his hand. Mark sat by the hearth, holding a silver tiger in the palm of his hand. He wasn't that Dong Yu. He wasn't the one who killed, not his hands, but the memory was his, and the gift was his, and the responsibility was his. He wrapped up the talisman, put it away, stood up, went out into the courtyard. The night was quiet. The stars shone like a scattering of embers on black velvet. The cold air smelled of pine needles and smoke. Voices drifted from the house. Sonhwa was saying something to Arim. Yunji was laughing. Quietly, but she was laughing. Minsu was singing a lullaby to Jungwoo. Ha-In was clinking glasses. He stood there, listening to the sounds of his home, his own home. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, he had a home. Not a hut, not a guardhouse in a national park. A home, with people inside, with a fire in the hearth, with voices behind the wall. A mounted detachment approached the estate across the first snow. 12 men, on horseback, wearing warm cloaks, armed. Riding at the front was a quiet official in blue. Not So-yeon Shik, another one, older. With the face of a man accustomed to having others obey him. They dismounted at the gate. They lined up. The official in blue stood at the front. He looked at the estate, at the fence, at the tiger pelt on the frame, at the smoke from the chimney, at the birch bark water pipe, at the dogs growling behind the gate. Dong Yu came out to meet them, alone, in an old deerskin jacket, unarmed. His hands were empty. He stood at the gate and looked at the official. The official looked at him. Behind Dong Yu, the doors of the house opened. He didn't turn around. He knew who was standing there. Sonhwa, with an account book in her hands. Yunji, with an awl. Minsu, with Jungwoo clinging to her skirt. Ha-In, with a grass knife at her belt. Arim, with small boards and a kayajim on her back. 5 women, 2 dogs, 1 boy, 1 house. The official in blue stared for a long time. Then he bowed, low, to the ground. He said, "Master Che, I've been sent to take you away." Dong Yu remained silent. The official straightened up. He looked at the house, at the women in the doorway, at the boy, at the tiger pelt, at this whole little world that the old man had built from nothing over the course of a year and a half. The official said he would report that he had found nothing. He turned around, mounted his horse. The 12 horsemen turned around. They rode off along the snowy trail, quietly, without a word. Hooves clattered on the frozen ground, and the sound faded until it dissolved into the silence of the forest. Dong Yu stood by the gate. A minute, 2. Snow fell on his shoulders, on his gray hair, on his gnarled hands which hung at his sides. He stood and listened to the silence. Then he turned around. Sonhwa stood in the doorway. She was looking at him, calmly, without fear, without tears, without unnecessary words. She said, "Come in. Dinner's getting cold." He looked at her, at the woman who a year ago had come to his door, pale with hunger, and who now stood in the doorway of her own home, calling him by name. Not Mr. Cho, just Dong Yu. He went inside. He sat down by the hearth. Yunji handed him a bowl, hot porridge with kimchi and smoked meat. Minso poured him some barley broth. Ha-In tossed a pinch of mountain herbs into the broth. Aryum wrote the date and a single word on a small board. Home. Jungwoo climbed onto his lap. Heavy, warm, alive. The dogs lay at his feet. The redhead rested her head on his boot. Dong Yu ate the porridge. He drank the broth. He stared at the fire. Warmth radiated from the hearth and from the people around him, from their voices, from their hands, from the fact that they were here. Everyone, together. He closed his eyes. He touched his chest. The courtyard was full. Meat, herbs, hides, supplies for the whole winter. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was that the vastness no longer felt like a curse. For the first time in 40 years, it felt like what it was meant to be from the very beginning, like a gift, one that had finally found someone to serve. Snow was falling quietly outside the window, evenly, settling on the mountains like a white blanket. The second winter was beginning, but in this house, it was beginning differently, with full supplies, with sturdy walls, with people who know their craft and their place, with a tiger pelt on a frame in the courtyard, with the Kaya Gym Artyom behind the wall, with the scent of kimchi and alder smoke, with a boy on the old man's lap, and with the silence that exists only where people are at peace. Dongyu finished his herbal tea. He set the cup. He looked at Sonhwa. She was sitting across from him, keeping track of the accounts, a quill between her fingers, small, neat handwriting, income, expenses, stock. She looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't smile. She just looked at him, calmly, steadily, like someone who knows that everything is all right. He nodded at her. She nodded back. He thought that in a past life, he had died at the gate of a guardhouse in the Rocky Mountains, alone, in a blizzard, with the cold in his bones. And in this life, he was sitting by the hearth, in the warmth, in his own home, with people who had been waiting for him with dinner, and who cared whether he was alive or not. He thought that this wasn't a bad second chance. The snow outside the window fell quietly. The fire in the hearth crackled. The boy on his lap was falling asleep. Dongyu closed his eyes and, for the first time in a year and a half, didn't think about tomorrow, because tomorrow could wait.